Welcome to FSAI HUB Research University, your ultimate guide on your next research project.
We will lay down the best practices in research ideation, literature review, experimental design, and data analysis to guide you as you carry out your research project. Learn from the FSAI HUB team of research scientists and some invited subject matter experts. FSAI HUB Research University will be your personal coach through every stage of your research project, from ideation to final assessment.
And the best part, it's absolutely free.
Visit us at FSAIHub.com and be part of this learning journey.
Let's learn and succeed together here at FSAI HUB Research University. Welcome to FSAI HUB Research University, your ultimate guide on your next research project.
We will lay down the best practices in research ideation, literature review, experimental design, and data analysis to guide you as you carry out your research project. Learn from the FSAI HUB team of research scientists and some invited subject matter experts. FSAI HUB Research University will be your personal coach through every stage of your research project, from ideation to final assessment.
And the best part, it's absolutely free.
Visit us at FSAIHub.com and be part of this learning journey.
Let's learn and succeed together here at FSAI HUB Research University.
Mabuhay! Welcome to the Filipino Science Hub. Thank you for your continued support to this online platform. To our new participants, thank you for checking us out today, and we would like to officially welcome you to the FSAI Hub family. Before we start the webinar, I would like to share some house rules in order to facilitate a smooth session. For our Zoom participants, we would appreciate it if you could turn your audio and video cameras off during the webinar. If you have questions or comments, feel free to type them on our Zoom chat box or YouTube live comments, and we will try to accommodate as much questions as possible. After the talk, we will have a 30-minute Q&A where the Zoom participants will have the opportunity to ask their questions live. For those who would like to receive a certificate of participation, a Google form link will be posted on our Zoom chat box, YouTube live comments, and YouTube video description towards the end of the webinar. Again, welcome to all our Zoom participants and YouTube live viewers. For those who are new and may not be familiar with who we are and what we do, allow me to share our mission and vision in the next few minutes. Filipino Science Hub is an online platform founded by our CEO, Filipino scientist, Dr. Jeffrey Camacho-Bonquin, back in 2012. Currently, we are a registered nonprofit organization based in Houston, Texas, United States. Our mission is to promote STEM education and the culture of research among students and teachers in the Philippines and abroad. Our current global leadership team is comprised of volunteer Filipino scientists, seasoned STEM educators, and business executives across the globe. Our vision is to see a technology and innovation-driven Philippines, and we believe that this can be achieved by creating a new generation of well-rounded Filipino STEM enthusiasts. The vision is being carried out via our two major programs, the FSAI HUB Ed program and the FSAI HUB Research University. Through FSAI HUB Ed, we are able to empower and support our teachers by strengthening STEM fundamentals education. We believe that this is important because the more equipped our STEM educators are, the more they can inspire students to pursue a career in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. The other major program that drives our vision forward is FSAI HUB Research University. This is where we provide tools for fundamentals of research and bring practicing scientists closer to the educational sector. Our official website is www.fsaihub.com. This is where you can access all our materials such as webinars, tutorials, modules, virtual lab, and features, all of which are free. We are also present in several social media platforms, so follow us wherever you are most active on to get updated with our web events. Again, thank you for being with us this morning. To officially start our webinar, I would like to turn the virtual floor over to our host today.
Alright, magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat. So for today, we are delivering to you the second installment of our Thesis Essential Skills webinar series. So just allow me to very quickly share with you my screen. All right, JP, good morning.
Good morning.
Again, what time is it in Flint?
Happy Sunday morning. Right now it's 4 a.m.
Yeah, it's 4 a.m. So,
early.
All right. So, second installment of our Thesis Essential Skills webinar series. And for today, we're going to continue on our journey over the research process or research, a STEM research process like at the college level. So for today, we're going to be covering all these topics, so experimentation and most importantly, data analysis. So these will be covered by JP. And then I will also be covering research writing. And within that section, I will also be teaching you some of the essential skills needed for you to be able to draw meaningful conclusions, as well as tips and best practices on how you can actually come up or write a compelling research report. Ayan. So, in the interest of time, we're actually going to be handing over the floor to JP Onya, and he's going to talk about data analysis.
Okay. Let me just pull up my slides. Okay, is it visible now? My slides.
Yes.
Okay. So maybe I can start. So yesterday, we left off with the experimental design of a research project. So kahapon discuss natin yung approach sa pag-design ng experiments. And then I also shared some of the best practices or essential skills, both hard skills and soft skills that we can derive from coming up with an effective experimental design. And now, dito sa session na to, we are going to tackle analysis. So once you collect the data from your experimentation, then it's time for you to analyze that data so that you can draw meaningful conclusions that are tied up to your research question at hand. So again, my name is JP Onya. I'm a Pinoy scientist based here in Finland, and I'm one of the core members of the Filipino Science Hub. Today, I showed you this scheme on how we narrow down the research question into research aims and objectives, and how the experimental design aims to fulfill those research objectives. Okay, so pababa siya, papunta sa experimental design, and then yung mga outputs na nakukuha natin is ties back to the research question. Okay. So why is data analysis important in research? Analysis of data gathered to draw conclusions is very important because it confirms or rejects a hypothesis. So at the onset of your research, you're providing a hypothesis or yung educated guess mo or yung hypothesis mo about the research question. Data analysis should be able to confirm or reject whether that hypothesis is true. Also, data analysis provides reliable data that can serve as basis for future work. That's why it's really important that you make sure that your data analysis is accurate and reliable. Kasi ito yung mag-build the ground for future work. So, it's the accuracy of results kasi when-analyze mo yung data mo, you can complete if there are outlying results or spurious results that needs looking into. Kailangan mo ba mag-reject ng data? So, may process para doon. And to see if there is like some anomalies in the data or monthly trend. So you go back to your data and probably some aspects of the experimentation to improve the data further. And also, data analysis provides insights to new research areas. So talking about anomalies, if you see some well, not questionable, but anomalous results nakita mo naman na valid. So that will be a clue that you have some research aspects or some research directions to the topic at hand. No? So that's why it's really important that we take some time to analyze our data carefully because it paves the way for research areas based on intangible and concrete data. Okay? So, patuloy pa rin lang pumapasok ang mga participants natin. And I hope that our YouTube folks are getting this clearly kasi kahapon medyo choppy yung just let me know if
Yep. I think medyo muffled a few seconds ago. And I wonder if it's yung cable, if it's getting moved, yung connection sa computer mo. So if you could also just like check that. Kasi they're actually clear. Yan.
How about now?
Yeah, much better.
Okay. So I'll just stay this way.
Alright.
Okay.
Walang hihinga.
Okay. So let me just show this scheme. So tumigil tayo dito kahapon from the experimental design. And when from your experiments, you will get your data and analyze those. And sabi ko nga, your data analysis should pave the way for some conclusions that ties back to the research question. Okay? So ito dapat very tight itong scheme nyo when you are doing your college thesis. Kasi what's done perfectly, so magiging very tight or very coherent yung research project nyo or yung thesis nyo. And that will show in the final output. So as I said, quantitative data analysis is very important because of the aspects. Okay, so number one is that quantitative data analysis is used to measure differences between groups. So ito makikita natin na yung quantitative data analysis significant differences, say, from a control group treatment group. Okay, and so quantitative data analysis can be used to evaluate relationships between the variables. So kahapon we're talking about correlations. We're trying to establish relationships between variables. Let's say, for example, I
Yep, JP. Could you try something out? On your Zoom app, could you try to set the mic to be that of your computers, and then just like use your headset for as your speaker? Can we do that? So if you go to the mute button, select microphone. Yeah. Did you switch to your computers?
Same system.
Yes.
Yeah.
Switch now. Oh, yan. So super linaw.
Okay na. Okay na. Okay. So, ayun nga, yung quantitative data analysis contributes to evaluate relationships between the variables. Let's say, ano yung relationship between the increase in temperature, let's say, for example, the sales of ice cream in a certain area. So yun, quantitative data analysis can help us to establish those kinds of relationships. And also, quantitative data analysis can be used to test a hypothesis in a systematic way. So, one rigorous process by which we could test the hypothesis if it's significantly valid. And quantitative data analysis is the important tool for that. So, quantitative data analysis, as the name suggests, it deals with quantities or numbers. No? So, in contrast to quantitative data analysis, like we can express into numbers. And there's another research realm for that, this qualitative analysis. But quantitative data analysis, since we're dealing with numbers, so this is covered by statistics, no? By statistical analysis. So we can makikita yung jargon such as mean, or what have you, in the area of statistics. So statistics, there are like two main branches of statistics. There's descriptive statistics and inferential statistics. So in order to distinguish between these two types of statistics, i-focus ko lang yung notion ng population versus sample. No? So when we're dealing with our data, yung population, if we're dealing with like a certain data, let's say, what's the concentration of a certain metal, let's say, sa negative, for example. So yung population mo is the whole of the negative. Okay? While your sample is just a portion of that population. Let's say water samples from the Laguna Divide. Okay? So, or let's say, for example, a very simple analogy, parang population is like the whole cake. Sample is just a slice of that cake. Okay? And descriptive statistics deals with the data gathered from a sample. Let's say, dun sa water samples na kinolect mo dun sa Laguna Divide. No? And descriptive statistics is used to describe just the quality of that sample.
So, JP, I think this is a very good topic for further siguro discussion between the two of us. No? So, siguro, some of our college students might be wondering if they're performing college research for their thesis, why do they have to just measure a sample or a set of samples? Why not the entire population? So siguro po for the benefit of our students like in the audience, so JP used an example earlier that if you're studying, say, the water quality or cleanliness of Laguna de Bay,
Mhm.
if you are actually working on a research that has limited time and resources, you cannot afford to measure the quality of the entire lake.
Population, yeah.
Yeah. So the entire lake is the population. So yun po yung kabuuan. But what you can afford to actually study in your research at in college is representative. So you would get a portion of the water from the lake with the assumption that those representative, which we call samples,
Mhm.
would represent what the entire population is or what the entire body of water is. So yun po yun. Kasi wala kang sapat na time and you don't have enough resources. For example, if you're studying the quality of water in the ocean, no one will be able, or no one will have the capacity to study the entire ocean.
Yeah.
Ayun. So what JP is teaching you here is very important. Ayan.
Yeah. So, just recognize the notion between population and sample, no? Kasi doon papasok yung descriptive statistics and inferential statistics. Kasi yung inferential statistics makes assumptions based on the population, on the collection of the data that you're studying. Let's say, yung population ng uh, school students in the Philippines. So you don't have time to gather data from all the high school students in the Philippines. You can only take a certain sample.
Yep.
Now, yung representative representative sample. So when you're doing inferential statistics on the population, it's very important that your sample is representative. Ibig sabihin, dapat kung ano yung distribution ng, let's say, high school students sa buong population, the sample should go in that distribution. Yeah, 50% na moon or 50% distribution sa population is 50-50. Hindi pwede yung sample mo ay 70% male and 30% female. So dapat kapag siya yung population, it's representative. Okay? So,
And JP, siguro may isingit lang ako. So, students, yung term dito, it's actually very intuitive. So when you say descriptive, you're a bit more exact, no? Descriptive kasi you're only measuring the sample. Pag sinabi ni Kuya JP nyo that inferential, meaning what you, like the findings from the sample, is what you use to describe the
whole population.
Yeah, so essentially yung term natin sa college or sa STEM na extrapolation. So you only have data for a small subset of samples, but then you are extrapolating that, okay, the entirety of the population, more likely the behavior or the natural phenomenon is going to be the same. So inferential, you don't have all the numbers, but based on the outcome from the samples, you can make that intelligent inference.
Kaya inferential siya.
Yes.
Okay? So, let's first describe or discuss descriptive statistics. So, sabi ko na, it describes the sample data set. So, kapag sinasabi natin na descriptive statistics, we are really describing as the name suggests. So ito muna yung first level. So, we're just like describing the sample data set. And for that, we have different aspects of descriptive statistics we want to do. So, kung meron kang set of numbers or set of sample data, you can take the mean or the mathematical average of the data set. And for that same set of data, you can also check the mean or the midpoint value when the numbers are arranged in numerical order, let's say from lowest to highest. Mode is the most frequently occurring number in the data set. We'll give examples later. No? The standard definition, it includes the closeness or the conformance of numbers to the mean or the average. And skewness describes the symmetry of distribution if it's skewed to the left or to the right, or positive or negative skew. So let's take this example. So I have here, let's say, a sample of 10 students and their test scores, let's say, for a mathematical examination. Okay, so makikita natin yung mean or average here is 82.1. And the median is 84. So ito yung midpoint yung sample set. And kasi square na ulit. There's no repeating value in this case. Let's say, kung meron ako the value that's sample set ko, 85 is the mode. But in this case, wala ulit, so there's no mode. Okay? And the standard deviation is 9.7, so makikita natin na medyo a standard deviation or malaki yung difference between the things, because makikita natin na makikita natin ranges from 65 to 91. So medyo malaki yung spread. Okay? And the skewness is a bit negative. So makikita natin na yung mean natin is a little below the median. So there is a negative skew. So the skewness is very important because it describes if our sample data set is normally distributed. So pag sinabi natin normally distributed, it's symmetrical distribution, where the mean is roughly equal to the median. So makikita natin na very symmetrical yung distribution of data. Whereas, if your data is skewness, so siya distributed. No? So sometimes it's positively skewed, yung is or theoretically. So not siya normally distributed. And this is very important to know later on. Para mag-determine most probably to determine what treatment or what's statistical treatment to be used for your data. Kasi yung ibang statistical treatment are only applicable for distributed data from the sample. Tapos yung iba naman are applicable para dun sa normally distributed data. So it's very important to evaluate this at the onset. Statistical treatment that you can use for your data. Okay, so that's descriptive statistics for you. So at this point, we're still describing the sample data set without making inferences yet on the data, or inferences on the entire population. So what we have right now is just a sample. Okay. So at any point in this discussion, if we have some questions, just type it in on the chat box so I can see the YouTube comments or if Doc Jeff can just like assist if there are any questions there.
I will be monitoring questions over YouTube. But yeah, so what JP and I are doing po during this session, and same as yesterday, we are injecting a few minutes of Q&A before we proceed with the topics. So if you have questions about samples, population, descriptive statistics, as JP had actually discussed in the previous couple of slides, please ask your questions po. So siguro ito, JP, what I really appreciate about what you're sharing here is that you also gave a visual representation of skewness, no? Especially in terms of, like how they can probe that by looking at the median and the mean values from yung sample measurements. So I guess what I'm learning from here is that if the mean, median, and mode are actually very similar in values, so that would indicate us symmetrical distribution, And then negative skew naman is if the mean is actually less than median and the mode. And then positively skewed the other way around if the mean is actually higher in value than the median and mode. So students, tatandaan nyo to kasi most especially if you're doing quantitative research, so if you're performing experimentations and you're gathering up a number of empirical data, your thesis committee will ask questions about, okay, like what about, like your the skewness of your data. And why is it really important in the interpretation nga pala, JP? Ano yung consequence, for example, kapag negatively skewed or positively skewed, what could that indicate about the quality of the results?
So, it can only give you the quality of the sample data at hand. So, wala na kayong in terms of the results, what you're just describing, so what is there is what it is. So, kung negatively skewed siya, we can say na hindi siya normally distributed.
Yes.
And during the duration of what statistical treatments may be applicable for normally distributed data. So, importante siya kasi baka magkagulatan sa let's say sa difference row. Bakit ito ginamit mo hindi naman pala normally distributed yung data nila.
Okay, so yes, JP, medyo muffled yung nakaraan, pero I would interpret it based on the keywords that I heard. So essentially, yung applicability ng statistical analysis tools na gagamitin nila, those will, yung validity nun depende sa distribution. Okay, so kapag negatively skewed at positively skewed, there are statistical tools that they cannot use. Or if they use them,
Okay. So that's why you will have to take some time to determine this exactly. Tapos meron din
siguro JP, let's put ourselves in the shoes of our students. So when they are performing the experiments, so is it good practice that as they generate the data, they look at the distribution already?
Yes.
Okay. So yung gagawin sa dulo, is that
sa dulo?
Okay.
So habang so kung distributed ba siya or may skewness. Kasi signal processing you will use later on. So, hindi pala doon siya natin natawag na parametric and non-parametric tests.
So siguro JP, medyo muffled nitong nakaraang couple of sentences. But so what you were saying was that don't do it at the very end. Don't delay. Okay. And siguro JP yung tanong ko rin, this is like a fairly leading question. What if, say, they have 3 months to perform the experiment. Within the first month, nakikita nila na ay negatively skewed or positively skewed. What can they do? Ano ba yung so is it So ang tanong ko sa JP is, would it help to get more samples and run more measurements?
Not necessarily. Kasi, sa sample ko, what if it's negative skewed, then probably it is negative skewed. So, this is,
Medyo muffled, JP. Could you check the connection? Yeah.
hello?
Yes. Oh, that's better.
Okay.
Yes. Mas okay kanina nung nag-hello ka.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So, I was,
Nung nag-lean forward ka, super clear.
ayan. So,
And then, merong suggestion yung mga would it work? Maingay ba dyan sa apartment if you're not using a headset? Would it be very loud?
About now?
Oh yeah, super clear.
Okay lang.
Oh yeah.
Okay lang yun.
Yeah.
Okay. So
I think this is better. This is better than with
this is better.
Yes.
Okay.
I think there medyo nagcha-choppy pero hindi siya muffled ka parehas nung with the headset. All right. So and it could also be the internet connectivity kasi sometimes it also happens to me. Most especially if there's a condition here in Texas. Ayan.
So I was
sabi na you might have to get closer to the device daw. Thank you so much, Julia, for your suggestions. Mukhang expert Zoom itong si Julia. All right. So siguro JP yun, if they discovered in the middle or like in the midst of running the experiments that, hey, what I'm getting is negatively skewed or positively skewed. Siguro ang tanong ko is, would it help to get more samples and run more analyses?
Sabi ko kanina lang necessarily.
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily. Kasi paano mo sa example ka, what's the outcome?
Okay.
So,
so is the way forward to make, okay, like when they are processing the data, they acknowledge that this is negatively skewed, and then are there specific statistical methods that would work even if skewed yung data?
yes.
Okay, so it's a matter of, okay.
It's also a matter of the choice of the statistical treatment.
Okay, so I guess like students, I like this discussion and I'm learning kasi much of what I have done like in grad school, it's synthesis, wala namang masyadong ganito, no? We're creating like a new process for building certain molecules, so hindi po ganito yung atake namin sa ginagawa namin. But so I guess students, like, best practice is look at the skewness and make sure that the statistical tool that you're using is still going to be valid.
Yeah.
Even if skewed yung data nyo. Alright, so hindi nyo rin kailangang i-force na maging symmetrical distribution. Kasi it will happen that even if you run more samples, nothing's gonna change. You just have to make sure that yung statistical tool that you're using is fit for purpose or fit for the nature of the data that you're gathering up. Okay, meron questions, JPC, Sir Mark. Yeah. So what will be the basis of sampling size to make the data gathering statistically sound and adequate from a set of population?
Yeah, I'm very familiar with statistical method to do the sampling size. No? Pero kasi sometimes it's true time and resources to examples or videos, let's say for a certain experiment. Statistical methods to determine what the sample size would be.
Okay, so I think what I like here, JP, is that kasi back in the days, no, merong certain notion that oh, you just have to have a minimum of 3 or a minimum of 5.
Yeah.
Hindi valid pa ba yun? Are those still valid assumptions?
Is like to have at least 3.
To have at least 3. Medyo nawala ka dun sa last sentence, JP. Yes.
So, experiments. So, what happens clinical trials?
Could you repeat it again, JP? Medyo nawala. Yes.
So, I would say, kailangan at least 3 trials. At least, at least. So it depends on resources, on how much sample you can gather. Statistical tools. Because statistics statistical tools that are size for data processing.
Ayan. Medyo ano siya. Medyo muffled siya. Pero siguro yung nakita ko
It's probably the internet connection.
Yeah, it must be the internet
Yeah.
connection. Please everyone bear with
Sorry
us.
po.
No, but it's actually better now. Could you say it one more time?
Yeah.
Yes,
Is it better now? Okay. So, ko kasi yung internet connection ko kanina. Okay na po
Could you perhaps like try to turn your video off while you're speaking? Let's see if the audio will improve.
How about now?
I think it's better. Could you try like say like
let's try. Question. So,
are you speaking, JP? Mukhang ano, it could really be the internet connection.
yeah.
Pero pwede natin balikan mamaya yung question about like sample sizes, minimum yung 3 and 5. I think maganda yung sinabi mo kanina eh. And then siguro ito may isang question kay Sir Ernest John Gabonada. Good morning, sir. What will you do if that statistical tool or method that the journal you are basing your study on, because there are similarities with what you're conducting, will not fit from the data that you have collected?
So,
yeah, JP. Yeah, I think JP, we're not hearing you. Could you try out the headset again? Baka it. Yeah. So.
Yeah.
Try lang natin. Ayan.
Sorry, guys.
Ayan, could you try it? Kasi so yeah, malinaw.
Ayan. Okay naman.
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Sorry.
No problem.
Doon sa question ni Ernest, so mamaya, may share ako ng link na parang it will serve as a guide kung ano yung pwede natin gamitin na statistical tools kung sakaling yung journal na binabasa mo ay hindi applicable sa data mo. So there is like a guide on the statistical tools that you can use based on the data.
Yes.
Okay.
That was super clear, JP. That was super clear. So far, what you're doing right now, the feng shui of what you're doing right now is working well.
Okay. So can we move on to the next slide now? Okay.
All right.
I hope this is fairly clear to everyone. Ayan. So that was descriptive statistics for you. Now, for the inferential statistics, we are now trying to make inferences on the population based on the sample data set. So there are different kinds of inferences. There is like when we're trying to establish differences between groups. So yung, let's say, a control group na wala tayong manipulation or control na ginawa, or wala tayong treatment na ginawa dun sa group na, that's the blank or the control group versus the treatment group. Okay? And also like the different levels of treatment that we carried out. So, and there is also a second type of inferences when we are establishing relationships or correlation between the variables. Okay. So inferential statistics is used for hypothesis testing, as I've said, to establish differences or causality. So let's say if one variable causes the change in another variable, or there is causality between the variables. And for this, we are now making assumptions about the population based on the sample data set. So, yung sinasabi namin niya kanina ni Kuya Jeff is that it's very important that we take representative samples so that yung inferences natin about the whole population is valid. So, the composition of the sample, no matter what size that is, should be representative on the distribution or composition of the population under study. So just like kasi last time may nag-use na yung in terms of terminology, akala niya yung population it only refers to the population of people.
Yeah, human population. So it's
population. So
yes, at this level set, now when we talk population here, we're not like talking about human population.
Ang population in this case describes the entire collection, no, of the data. Yun nga, nasabi natin na kunyari sa Laguna Dibay, yung Laguna Dibay, yung population. And the sample is just like a portion of that population. Okay. So these are the different statistical tools, statistics used for inferential statistics. Of course, this is not all, but I'm just giving this as examples. So we have the t-test. So when we're trying to establish a difference between, let's say, a control group versus the treatment group, statistics t-test could be a useful tool to compare the means specifically of these two groups of data to test if they are significantly different. No? So there is a threshold in order to say that the mean of this group is significantly different from the mean of the other group. So it's just a pairwise comparison. And that's the t-test. So yung second naman, yung ANOVA, short for analysis of variance, it compares the means of multiple groups. So if we have different levels of treatment dun sa data mo, so let's say yung dosage is pataas na pataas. So yung analysis of variance or ANOVA, it compares the means among the treatment groups. No, so it's just like a t-test on steroids. No, it compares the means of more than two data groups. So, yun nga, yung analysis of variance. So, the third one is correlation analysis. And this evaluates the relationship between the two variables. So, inano lang natin kung there is correlation. Sinasabi ko nga, let's say, for example, the sales of ice cream versus the average day temperature, let's say sa Manila. So, tinitingnan natin if there is strong or weak correlation between those two data. And the fourth one is regression analysis. And when we are trying to assess the relationship, if there is cause and effect. So dito naman, yung regression analysis establishes if there is causality between the two sets of data. Let's say, for example, on the same example, kung mahimik yung panahon, ibig sabihin tataas na yung sales ng ice cream. And regression analysis can aid in establishing cause and effect between the two variables. So is that clear for everybody? So ito yung mga terminologies na may encounter nyo sa pag nagbabasa kayo ng mga let's say journal articles. So may ANOVAs, correlation analysis, and just be on the lookout on ano yung ibig sabihin ng mga terms na to. So pag sinabi na ANOVA, so ibig sabihin nagko-compare lang ng means, let's say among treatment groups, or kung meron ka lang dalawang set of data, a t-test comparison may already be enough to compare if there is significant difference between, let's say, a control group and a treatment group. Tapos yung correlation analysis and regression analysis, medyo high level na siya. So, pag sinasabi natin na yung correlation na pinaka familiar sa atin is yung R value. Dapat ang value niya is close to 1 or 0.99999. So, sinasabi natin that there is strong correlation between those two variables. And regression analysis, ito naman, dun sa linear regression, di ba, yung pinaka-familiar sa atin is yung y equals mx plus b. So, yung y is determined by your x. No? So, yun yung pinaka-familiar sa atin. But in multiple regression analysis, hindi lang siya y equals mx plus b. You have different terms that contributes to the y. Hindi lang x. Ayun.
Alright, so yung algebra nyo in high school and in college will really be very useful as
we will come into play now kapag yung ginagawa nyo na itong mga statistical treatments or statistical.
What I truly appreciate about how you summarize all of these, JP, is that at this point, you know, like the students will have an idea of when do I have to use ANOVA, you know, because based on my experience, so I think like our statistics in UP, it was actually taught really, really well in that we knew how to apply these tools when we perform our research in college. But then at this point now, with all the changes in the curriculum, it's also not clear to me if what they learn in statistics, they have an idea of how and when to apply them. So again, what JP has shared with you, you'd know now when to use a t-test, when to use an ANOVA, what the meaning of correlational and regression analyses are.
Yeah, and hopefully you can come back to this discussion kung medyo nagiging sa inyo yung rules ng terms na to.
Yes.
Okay. So, let us now come into uh, let us now come to the decision kung ano yung statistical methods based dun sa type or sa nature dun sa quality uh, ng data na ginagawa natin.
Yep. JP, can we entertain one question before you move to this?
Sure.
Okay, so there was a question that was sent to me, no? So it's not gonna be visible to everyone. So this is a question from Julia. So sabi niya, so in essence po, sir, the t-test is specifically designed for comparing means between two groups. Well, yeah, between two groups. Okay, it's a good point. While ANOVA is used when comparing means among 3 or more groups.
3 or more groups.
All right,
Yes.
so t-test between 2, ANOVA more than 2.
More than 2.
Okay, and then also, I wanted to ask po ulit about one-way ANOVA and two-way ANOVA because I remember we considered using them sa quasi-experimental research paper namin last year. Pero I couldn't really tell kung alin sa one-way and two-way po yung gagamitin.
I think it depends on the nature din sa sample data mo. Wala ipapakita kung pwede gamitin kung one or two-way ANOVA. And we also have very extensive on statistical analysis. I will show you later. Don. Okay.
Thank you for answering those questions, and thank you, Julia, for asking that question.
Yeah, thank you. So yun nga, parang depende sa type, sa quality ng data na meron tayo, we can determine the right statistical methods to use. So, and one of the determining factor is the type of quantitative data. So, mamaya ipapakita ko sa inyo yung different types of quantitative data, if it's nominal, ordinal, or interval type of data. So, that determines the right statistical method. And also, the nature of your research question and hypothesis. So, kunyari, yung nature ng research question mo is only descriptive, then descriptive statistics might do the job already. So parang kung ang nature ng experiments mo is descriptive, parang pwede mo lang ay ipakita yung different statistics na pinreset ko rin na yung mean, median, standard deviation, or mode. No? Tapos kung inferential naman, or correlational, then meron din statistical methods appropriate for that. Okay? But let me just first introduce the different types of quantitative data. Yan. So, meron tinatawag na categorical or numerical data. So, yung categorical data, it only indicates the inherent quality of the subjects, let's say the gender or ethnicity, male or female, or kung saan mang region, let's say ng Pilipinas sila nanggaling from. Let's say kung saan yung address nila, kung Batangas ba, Laguna, or what have you. Ano natin magagamit yung categorical data for statistical processing? So, sometimes we're, well, the only way that we can do that is by assigning a numerical value for that qualitative data. Let's say, for example, you ascribe the numerical value 1 for male or 2 for female, etc. So parang nagbibigay ka lang ng numerical value. You're only associating a numerical value to a qualitative data. Let's say gender, for example. Tapos, yung numerical data naman, as the name suggests, these are numbers, no? Let's say, for example, height, weight, or temperature. So these are numeric in nature, and naturally, you have numerical data. So, under categorical data, you have two types or two levels of measurement, the nominal and ordinal type of categorical data. So dun sa nominal type ng categorical data, you only have an assigned value. So walang order or ranking. So let's say just gender, male or female, eye color, nationality. So walang rank. While dun sa ordinal, the data fall into categories from a natural order or ranking. Let's say income level or level of disagreement. Let's say one is slightly agree, or one is zero is disagree, or five is strongly agree. So there is ordering or ranking depending sa dun sa category, no? So that's the ordinal type of categorical data. Or let's say, for example, low income level, medium income level, or high income level. Tapos naman, dito sa numerical data, there are two subtypes for that, or two levels of numerical data. The interval data. And these are numerical data, but yung 0 point is arbitrary. So it has no meaning. So let's say, for example, temperature. Sinabi mo na 0 degrees Celsius. Ibig sabihin ba ng temperature? So, yung 0 na value is just arbitrary or inscribed lang na siya na value. So it's not absolute, in short. No? Kapag na sinabi na yung IQ mo, IQ score mo is 0, ibig sabihin wala kang IQ. So I hope not, no? But yung 0 point is arbitrary. That's why it falls into this category of interval. But there is, since numerical data siya, establish yung interval between the values, let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So regular yung interval. But the 0 point is arbitrary. Okay? So just take time to digest this na iba yung interval sa ratio. The ratio type of numerical data are numerical, but the 0 means absolute 0. Okay? So, kapag sinabi natin na yung height is 0 centimeters, so ibig sabihin wala siyang height. Or 0 kilograms, so it's weightless. Or 0 seconds, so ibig sabihin there's no time, no? 0 seconds. So these are the difference between the interval and the ratio type of numerical data, and also between the nominal and ordinal data. And this is very important dun sa pag-process natin ng data, pag-analyze natin ng data, kung anong statistical methods yung applicable for these different types of data. Kasi ipapakita ko, pinapakita nila, they're indicating ano yung type ng quantitative data applicable for that statistical method. Okay. So I don't see any questions for this.
So JP, there are questions there's a couple of questions from YouTube.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is from Ryan Nove Wang. So he's asking about differences between parametric and non-parametric tests.
Yeah. Yung parametric test only applies to a normally distributed data. So babalik tayo sa descriptive statistics natin. So there are parametric tests and non-parametric tests. Kung meron skewness dun sa data mo, then we will use non-parametric tests.
All right. You know what?
Okay.
Like this reminded me of the first time that we were asked these questions
Yeah.
less than 3 years ago. That was very solid and clear answer that you just gave.
Yeah.
There's another question. Siguro, you know, like when it comes to interval type of numerical data.
Yeah.
So same question. Question also coming from Ryan Nove Huang.
Yeah.
So sabi niya, if temperature is in Kelvin, would it still be considered interval data?
Yes. Kasi pag 0 Kelvin, meron siyang, di ba, tawag dito, meron siyang coordinate sa Celsius scale
Okay.
or sa Fahrenheit scale. So, makikita natin na yung 0 Kelvin doesn't mean zero temperature. It means another temperature, another scale. Di ba?
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for answering those questions. All right.
Okay. So, yun na. Parang, dito, kung site na to, I will share the link kasi I just came across this website na it serves as a guide on what type of statistical methods that you can use based on the data that you have. If you have an interval type of data and normally distributed data. So, dito naman, pag sinabi niya na normal, applicable lang siya for normally distributed or parametric type of data.
JP, could you share the link sa chat box and also
Yeah.
I will share it sa YouTube para they can also
Yeah, this is very useful.
all right, thank you.
Yeah. So, ayan, dito nyo lang tingnan kung ano yung statistical tool appropriate for your data. If you have categorical data, ordinal or interval, and then ito yung independent variables, kung ano yung type of variables that you have. Ayan. So it's very extensive list on how you could determine the type and the statistical method that you can use. So if I may just go back to the sample that I did yesterday. So dito sa study nila sa Polarse, so ito, pinakita nila na ang ginamit daw nila is this Kruskal-Wallis test for pairwise comparison for, let's say, this the data for color change, the results for color change. So, balikan natin yung dito. So, nandito yung Kruskal-Wallis. Yan. So, in-apply nila for an interval or an ordinal data kasi color change. So, para nag-ascribe lang sila ng value for color change. And they use this Kruskal-Wallis test. So feel free to visit this website and pwede nyo rin i-reverse engineer. No, kung let's say for example, dun sa journal article na binasa nyo, ang binanggit niya na test method, if you want to use the same test method, let's say the Wilcoxon-Mann-Whitney test, then we can reverse engineer it to determine what type of data you put together. No? So, pwedeng applicable siya sa ordinal or interval type of data, and then one or two independent groups or independent variable with just like one dependent variable. So, meron din dito 2 or more and 2 sets. Hindi ko alam yung ibig sabihin ng 2 sets of 2 plus. Yan. So, pwede mong i-reverse engineer kung ano yung type ng data and ano yung independent or dependent variable na gagamitin mo depending on that statistical test.
By the way, JP, there's a very interesting question that was
Yeah.
asked from YouTube now. And I think this is an audience member dialing in all the way from Indonesia.
Okay.
So the question was, does a qualitative research need statistics?
Yes. Dun nga sa pinakita natin na dun sa for qualitative data, you can use statistical tools by ascribing numbers to that qualitative data.
Oh yeah, so when they
No?
run surveys, no? So when
When
they
they
run
run survey. Yeah, so parang kunyari yung question mo is answerable by the level of agreement. So kung if you strongly disagree, 0.
Yep.
And then when you super agree, then 5 yung ascribe value niya. So that way, you can use statistical tools and apply that for qualitative data.
Oh yeah, and so I think, I'm glad that this question was asked and you were able to clarify it, kasi
Yeah.
it's very important when it comes to the interpretation of the data, no?
Yeah.
That when they claim that majority of the survey takers gave this answer, you can ascribe siguro like more statistical a more statistically meaningful interpretation of it.
Interpretation, which is tied up to your research question. No? Ayan.
Right.
Okay. So let me just put my slides again.
Thank you. So there's a follow-up question by the same audience member from Indonesia. So like JP, I just made that clarification po that yeah, even for qualitative research, you can actually use statistics.
Mm-hmm. Ayan. So, dun sa kanila, pinakita ko yung different types of quantitative data and then what statistical method appropriate for that quantitative data, and then pwede mo naman din natin i-determine kung what statistical method to use depending on the nature of the research question or hypothesis. Again, if you're just like seeking to understand the characteristics of the sample, then descriptive statistics, they already suffice. No, descriptive stat lang, mean, median, mode, etc. Then, if you are comparing the correlation or where you're establishing significant differences between groups, control group versus treatment groups, or between variables. So, dito na papasok yung inferential statistics, no? Or if you want to predict or describe or make assumptions about the population, then inferential statistics, as I've said, correlation or regression may be applicable for you. And then just check on what statistical method to use, what is appropriate for your data na nag-gather mo. Okay? Yeah, so I've just like given you a sample or a flavor of the quantitative data analysis that you can use on your experimental on your experiments or your experimental data. But we have a rigorous and a very comprehensive webinar on the basic statistical design of experiments. So feel free to visit that on our website at FSAIHUB.com and then on our YouTube. And this was given by Professor Tara Paul Ebal from the Institute of Statistics at UP Los Baños. So if you have, kasi yung knowledge ko about statistical, about statistics in general, but si Professor Lara is a statistician, so feel free to check the webinar on statistical design of experiments.
All right. Thank you so much, JP. What I really also truly appreciate about how you delivered this talk was you also showed them the basics, yung fundamentals, no, like how they check the skewness of the data and making sure that once they get those numbers and have mapped them out, they would know which statistical tool to use. So just because, you know, you're comparing between two groups, you know, like you can perhaps like use t-test, but then again, do your due diligence check using the tools that JP shared, like through that website, because they also prescribe what would be the best fit statistical you can use. Process
and make that conscious effort to analyze your data as soon as you get them, no? Para wala nang balikan sa at the very end.
Don't delay the data processing at the very end of your project and just before you are writing. If you're doing it at the very end, your data might be problematic or you know, like deviating from, you know, like what you were also like expecting. So it takes away your agility, you know, like to do more experiments, for example, or to verify, you know, like if the data are actually valid or sound. So best practice, as your Kuya JP had mentioned, as you get the data, you have to start analyzing.
Yeah. Okay. And I'm leaving you with this scheme again. And I just couldn't stress enough how important it is to have a coherent research. So again, we narrow it down to the research aim and objectives, experimental design, where we get your data and analyze your data to draw valid conclusions tied up with the research question. So Dr. Jeffrey will continue with the specific ways to validly draw conclusions from the data analyzed. No? And I will hand over the screen.
Yep. Are you seeing the right
screen?
Are you seeing the screen?
Yeah.
All right.
So the research process.
All right. So okay. All right. So it's my turn. Thank you so much, JP. If you could, relyebo tayo, no? If you could, like, you know, monitor the comments from YouTube, because we have like quite a number of participants there. So, as we promised yesterday, we told you that we're gonna navigate over all of the steps in a research project, all the way like leading up to the writing of a thesis. So the remaining steps here are drawing conclusions and then writing a research report or your thesis. But then, like, the way I am actually gonna do this is we're gonna go straight into scientific report writing. And then when it gets to the conclusion, that's when I will teach you best practices on how to draw meaningful conclusions given the data that you got. So what JP taught you in terms of interpreting the data, most especially quantitative data, I will also like show you how you can come up with data-driven or data-based conclusions or claims. So that's very important. And along the process, JP taught you the you know, like analytical thinking as an essential skill. So you have to question the data. You have to visualize it for you to better understand it. Now, when it comes to drawing conclusions, what we're intending to also teach you is the importance of critical thinking and objectivity, most importantly, objective. So meaning, are your claims backed by data? You know, or are you overclaiming? Or are your claims proven by the work that you did? That's objectivity. And then lastly, communication. So when you write up your thesis, why are you being asked to write it up? So there's a reason for that. That is to communicate your body of work. All right. So over the next hour, I will be covering essentially the last step, communicating your scientific research in the form of reports. So if you actually would notice, I have also like highlighted here a couple of caricatures, no? So there are two when you're writing up your research report, there are two main participants in this process. So the first of which is the writer or the researcher. And then the second are the stakeholders. So those who would actually read up your report. So your reports may be read by a peer reviewer if you're publishing it in a journal, or it may be read by your thesis committee, those who would approve that, hey, yeah, you did a great job, you passed, and then therefore you can earn your undergraduate degree. So the reason why we're talking about this is that you are writing up or summarizing your body of work or your college research for it to be read. Okay, you're not just doing it and sending it out to a vacuum or out in the outer space and no one would care. All right, so similar to our approach yesterday, before we dig deep into the technicalities of writing up a scientific report, we're gonna start with the definition of a scientific report. Ano nga ba ang scientific report? So this is a definition of a scientific report, which essentially says that it is a document that describes the process, progress, and or results of technical or scientific research, or the state of a technical or scientific research problem. A scientific result might also include recommendations and conclusions of the research. So we will unpack that. Okay, so when you start writing your thesis, there are at least like 3 elements that you should aim for. The first of which is you have to describe the process by which you performed your study or your research, and the results that came out of it. Okay, so you're documenting what you did and what you got out of it. And then second element here is the state of a technical or scientific research problem. So you're actually highlighting the value of what you did by comparing and contrasting it with what has already been done in the field. So dito papasok yung what we taught you yesterday about justifying or the conceptual framework behind your research project. And once you have already talked about those, you know, the problem they're trying to solve, in contrast to what's been done before, and then describing what you've done and what you found out, or the learnings that you got. When you write up your thesis, you have to offer conclusions, no? So what did you learn? So conclusions meaning, what were the answers to your research questions? Or what were the answers to your hypothesis? Were you able to prove or disprove your hypothesis? So yun yung conclusions that you're gonna offer or you're gonna communicate through your scientific report or in the form of thesis. And then optionally, there are times that if you covered a specific topic and you weren't able to answer all of the questions, you would also have the opportunity to make recommendations on what others can do to continue on the work that you have actually done. So ito yung future work section na tinatawag natin in the scientific report. Okay, so now that's the siguro basic definition of a scientific report. So siguro magtatanong naman ako. So before, like we said, we're infusing a couple of minutes of Q&A here. I would like to ask our students, no? So for some of you who are in the midst of the thesis process, some of you may have already written up a proposal and defended it. And I think most of you will have also experienced conducting a capstone project in high school. I know. So could you at least like give me an idea of your understanding? Why do we write research reports? Okay, so why were you asked to write research reports? Sige nga, magtatanong po kami. Pwede po ba kayong pwede po bang sumagot ang mga kasamahan natin sa Zoom at sa YouTube? What's the purpose? What's the purpose of writing up a research report?
Requirement lang ba siya? Support ko, Hector?
Busy? Is it to make your life difficult? Why do you think we are writing up scientific reports? Or why are we writing up a thesis? In a way, we already discussed this, no?
Yeah.
Yesterday. Okay, so unang sabi is to gather data, new knowledge. This is actually consistent with what your Kuya JP had mentioned or taught yesterday. And that when you are conducting your scientific research, you're essentially contributing something new to the body of knowledge. Sabi ni Nino, or to our proof of repeatability of existing knowledge or research output, which is also like very important because oftentimes when we are conducting research projects, we are also adapting methods that other people have used, and we are also using their data to siguro benchmark our own results, to prove the validity of what we're doing. So in a way, when you try to reproduce other people's results, you're also testing out the repeatability of their data. Sabi naman ni Julia na medyo mahiyain, in partial fulfillment of our requirements. Tama naman. It's a curriculum requirement. But then, and this is also and I think that is a very valid answer. Kasi oftentimes students don't have an idea. I mean, okay, this is part of the curriculum, so therefore I have to do it. But then, the reason why JP and I are doing this webinar series is that we are really highlighting what skills you could develop if you take this seriously and if you also understand the higher purpose of writing up a thesis, no? Sabi naman ni Haron Umpar, for me as a student or practice teacher, my own opinion also, the purpose of a research paper is to show a student how to enter the stream of this course within an academic community. Very important. Because it's one thing to perform the study, it's one thing to conduct research, but the truest sense of any research endeavor is only realized once you communicate your results.
Exactly.
Once you communicate your learning, just like talent or skill, the truest meaning of any talent or skill is only realized when it is shared with others. So ganun din, when you learn something from performing research, you make it more meaningful by sharing it with the broader community.
Educating. Yeah.
Kasi if you can educate them. Okay, sabi na rin niya, research papers also give you experience in manipulating raw data and information, formulating informed opinions, and learning how others in your field use primary and secondary resources. Grabe, practice teacher pa lang tong si Haron, ha?
Yeah.
Pero I salute you. These are actually
Yeah.
these are the higher purpose of writing up a
Yeah.
research paper.
It's a practice. It's a rehearsal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So students, please take note. So in addition to it being a requirement, for you to be able to fulfill what's expected of you, para ma-earn nyo yung degree nyo, there are those skills that you are developing. So make sure that when you write up your report, when you perform your research, you're mindful that, okay, by doing this, I am learning this skill. I am getting better at this. Kapag binago niyo yung perspective versus, gagawin ko lang to kasi kailangan. So it takes away yung real sense ng education when you perform your thesis. Sabi pa ni Julia,
Yeah.
to refine your communication skills, talaga po, sir, I think, kasi with us, we learn how to structure information, very important, use language effectively, and
Yeah.
present complex ideas clearly and logically. Okay, and mind you, communication is an essential and differentiating skills. I can tell you, there's a lot of very intelligent people out there who struggle to communicate their ideas. And doon sila natatalo ng mga B students, ng mga average students, because average students, like though they might not be the quickest to process or to learn things, they are actually the ones who have actually honed their communication skills kasi marunong sila makisama, makipag-usap sa ibang tao. And if you really want to move up and influence people and influence a particular demographic, communication is your secret weapon. So don't take writing and communication for granted. Sabi naman ni Dominador Sunga, to share data or information and to validate the results of other researchers. I'm glad that you're actually, yung perspective of communication is actually aligned. So this is very important, and I'm hoping that you share this with your fellow students, no? Sabi naman ni Samsung SM-X205, mukhang ang
Samsung says hi.
in the form
Yeah.
of most of the time, we do this to comply with requirements. Again, like it's
Yeah.
valid. Sabi naman ni Haron, for me, napakahirap po. Since Filipino major po ako, and sobrang hirap po na research namin nung time na yon. Dapat Tagalog is Tagalog. Malalalim na salita ang ginamit namin that time, but in other major, very easy. Opinion ko lang. That is actually very true. I can just like imagine, as a chemist, I cannot write up a thesis in Tagalog.
Yeah. It's very difficult.
Mahirap.
It's very
Yes.
difficult. But
But,
it's very important also.
yeah.
Kasi,
But you know what?
we
If
have to
you're
put
if you're able to do it,
language. Yeah.
yes. But if you're able to do it, then yeah, you're actually also, like siguro trailblazing na rin in a sense. All right. So, I'm glad na na-energize na sila ngayon na sumagot. All right. So, are you seeing the right screen? Are you seeing my screen? GP?
Nakarinig pala. Nakikita ko.
All right. So,
Yeah.
like I said, communication, ibabalik ko kayo doon sa kung ano talaga natutunan ko sa aking English 1 sa UP. So when you write the term communication, it is always a two-way process. So sabi nga ni JP yesterday and earlier, you're doing research to contribute to the body of knowledge of a chosen research area. So if you don't communicate it, you're not contributing. Diba ganun yan? Real talk lang tayo. So, and communication is a two-way process. So when you are writing up your thesis, it is very important that you keep this in mind. Writing is a two-way process because it's not only a one-way outflow of information, you are writing it for an intended audience. So you're sending it and somebody has to receive it. So somebody has to read your information. And so dito, if I am the one writing up the thesis, ano ba yung main objectives ko? So my main objectives would be, first, to share information and my findings. And then secondly, yun nga, to contribute to the body of knowledge. But then if you're the one on the other side of the fence, if you're the one reading the report, your goal for reading papers or publications usually is like, first, to gather data and learnings, no? Kasi gusto mong ma-inspire. You are able to generate ideas from reading up or learning about what others have done. And then most especially, to also question, ano ba yung kulang? What's missing from what they've done before and what you can actually pursue to be the topic of your study. And then, if I'm also writing up a research paper, a thesis, typically I'm also there to verify their findings, no? In the context of what I'm doing for my own project. So, dito pa lang, so if it's clear to you, your readers are looking for your data and your conclusions, and most especially, they're also there to verify your findings. So if you keep this in mind, you would appreciate some of the best practices that we will be sharing with you later as you write up a research report, and most especially pagdating sa results interpretation and conclusion. All right, but keep this in mind. And then, like I said, this is a two-way process. You're writing up your thesis for an intended audience. So do you remember the design thinking process that I discussed yesterday? That when you're actually ideating, when you're trying to come up with an idea to solve a specific problem, one of the best approaches is to actually immerse yourself in your target audience or demographic. If you would like to come up with a great idea to help the lives of our farming communities, then you can actually go to the farming communities, ask questions, come up with an idea to solve their problems. The same thing when writing. So when you're writing, you have to write it for an intended audience. So for example, if you're actually writing up a science investigatory project in high school and you're competing, then therefore you are writing up your scientific report in a way that would resonate with the judges. In a way that would resonate with the body or the institution that is sponsoring the competition. But if you're actually writing up your thesis, then you would like for it to first be relatable or appreciated by your research community, first and foremost. But then secondly, you would also like for it to be appreciated by students like you who have majored in the same area. So again, you have to know your audience. If you're writing up a publication, then you're writing it up in such a way that experts in the field would agree and approve your findings. So first important, like one of the main considerations that I would like to inculcate in you when writing up is that you have to know your intended audience. Sino ba yung magbabasa? All right. So our main goal for today is, like to provide you with at least some sharings from my own personal experiences when it comes to writing research reports. So there's a couple of topics that we'd cover in this segment. The first of which is to cover the different parts of a research report. And then secondly, most importantly, for each of those sections, what information do we actually need to provide to make your thesis or your scientific report a compelling one? So it's one thing to write it, but not all scientific reports are written quite well. And this requires a lot of practice, and kailangan meron kayong idea of ano ba talaga yung structure and what should be in it for it to be a good paper. And I would also like to say, when I was in high school and in college, wala din kami mga gantong guidance. So napapagalitan kami ng mga professors namin back then kasi, oh, why do you write an abstract this way? Why do you write an introduction this way? And it's mainly because wala rin kasi talaga kaming training. And this is something that we are really trying to de-escalate, no? Na hindi nyo matutunan after nung gumawa kayo ng thesis. So before pa kayo mag-thesis, we are giving you some of the tips and best practices that we have learned through the years. So okay, tanong ulit. So what's your biggest challenge in research report writing? So based on your experience, whether it be in high school or also in college, what's the most difficult part about writing? Sige nga, pag-usapan natin. Saan kayo pinaka-nahirapan? Ano yung pinaka-dreaded na part ng writing that you can share with us?
Yeah, sabi ninyo, proposal making. So, very general siya.
Ayan.
But I think for the,
yes, CP?
no, I think for the most part, it's like how to start. How to start writing.
Yeah. Kasi, siguro sa proposal writing kasi, so it's not only that you're trying to come up with an idea, you're also justifying it and convincing your panel that, hey, like this approach or this study design makes sense. And it has to be approved, So, mahirap talaga yan. So, alam nyo, sa totoo lang, if you learn how to write a proposal, that is in a way teaching you skills that would also make you entrepreneurial. Kasi you're selling. You're selling your idea. You're selling your idea. You're convincing people that the topic that you chose and the questions that you're intending to answer are relevant and that they should support them. So, mahirap talaga yan. So, it's not only that you're writing it to convince. You are writing it up to get buy-in, from your target like stakeholders. Ayan. So,
wala pang nagsusulat. Pero, I think, personally, for me, it's the writer's block. So, paano magsisimula, diba? On how you structure the proposal making, but approved, sabi niya, it's okay na. But there are challenging stuff like validity of tool use, language translation. Ayan. Kasi specifically ng language, it's technical writing anyway. So, there is a set of language.
Medyo hindi ako familiar dun sa acronym na ERB. Anyways, ayan. So meron pang mga nag-message privately. Sabi naman ni Ramel Nudo, yung writing is, yung may challenging part of writing is enhancing students' capacity by advancing knowledge through scientific theories, concepts, and ideas, and finding related literature. So yan talaga yung challenge, no? Finding related literature. So ayan, pag-uusapan pa natin din yan, how you have to infuse related literature in all of the sections of a scientific report. Ito, sabi ni Haron, sa title defense po, 5 title pa lang, nahirapan na po kami doon. Very challenge po yan, and also review of related literature. Okay, so alam nyo ba, fun fact, actually fun fact, this is a fact. JP and I, we pursued graduate studies. So JP already finished like his master's and he's about to defend his thesis, no? In a few. That's typically 2 to 5 years on end. It's a 2 to 5 year process na puro research yung gagawin. Ako, I did my PhD for about 4.5 years. But would you believe that I worked on a project for 3.5 years and the last thing that we had to do was to come up with a title? So ito yung medyo tataka din po namin siguro sa atin sa Pilipinas, that when you perform research, sobrang laki ng fixation sa title. sa totoo lang po, you can come up with a title in the very beginning, but you can never really predict the outcome of your project.
Exactly.
It's the outcome of your project that should determine the title of your thesis.
Mhm.
So siguro po, if you're a student right now, this is something that you can change if you become a PhD advisor in the future. In that, don't overexert in the choice of a title, because again, the outcome or the conclusions of your from your project should actually dictate what the title should be. Yan po ang last namin na pinag-iisipan. Ayan. So ito
Yeah.
lang po, ay amin pong nasi-share perhaps there's a reason why certain universities ay ganun yung sistema. But then we would also like to share with you that in other countries and in other established institutions, there's hindi po ganun masyado ang emphasis sa simula. You can come up with a compelling proposal by having a very tentative title.
Exactly.
Ayan. O sinabi ni Sir Dominador Sunga, it can be changed through the process.
Hopefully naman.
Ay, hopefully po pumayag.
Pumayag ang ating mga
is Ethics Review Board. All right. So thank you so much for defining that acronym for me po. All right. So going back to my slide. So the way we will do this, if the right slide is showing, can you see this? Can you see the right slide?
I'm seeing the case study slide.
All right. So our approach here is not going to be a formulaic lecture in that, I'm going to define to you, an introduction is defined this way. The way we are going to approach this workshop is we are going to use the exact same case study that we used yesterday in generating an idea and justifying a study. So we'll use this hypothetical case study of, developing gold nanoparticles as anti-cancer mag-mute lang po ako, as anti-cancer agent. And then, so what we'll do is, like, as we work on this case study, we will tackle the different parts of a research report, and then we will be sharing with you tips and best practices as we course through some specific examples. Ayan, so para tayo magsusulat sa section na ito. All right. If my slide would decide to move forward. All right. Okay. So what's the basic structure of a research report? So whether you're writing up a scientific article or whether you're writing up a thesis, conventionally, it'll have the same basic structure. And what I'm showing you here is the MRAD approach. So yung MRAD acronym stands for, so after the abstract, it stands for introduction, methods, results, and discussion. And then a thesis or a scientific report would also have a set of conclusions. So as I mentioned earlier, you have to have a conclusion once you write up your thesis. And then optionally, if there are some aspects of your study that you weren't able to finish, you can offer recommendations for future work. And then very importantly, you have to also add a references section. But then the way I am showing you the typical parts of a research report, I have dissected it into specific segments and the type of report that you can make out of it. So typically, when you're writing up a research proposal, what do you need to have? You need an abstract, you need an introduction, and method. So essentially, your study plan ninyo, how you're intending to perform your research. So that's essentially like the main sections of a research proposal. And then once you implement your study and you start generating results and you interpret your data and you're able to come up with claims based on the literature, you can then discuss, okay, what have I found out and how do these data verify my hypothesis? So doon na papasok yung results and discussion section nyo and conclusions. And once you have actually completed all of those sections, what you would have is a completed research report, or in the context of an undergraduate degree, a completion, that's your thesis. Pag nabuo nyo yung lahat ng sections na yan. So if you have an entire year of performing your college research, so typically you spend your first 3 months siguro sa pag-develop ng proposal, and then the rest for executing it and completing your thesis. All right. But then, ito mabilisang overview. Ano ba talaga yung purpose ng different sections na yan? So your abstract, for example, is an overview of your study. An introduction. So the introduction essentially is the part of your thesis where you are fleshing out the specific questions that you're trying to answer. What are your research questions? Why are you doing this research? So yung justification ninyo. Methods naman is where you talk about the study approach. How you answered the questions, how you gathered your data. What are the standard methods and techniques and tools that you use to conduct your research? Results naman would talk about your findings. So what pieces of information did you gather while you were performing your experiment or while you were conducting your study? Discussion naman is interpretation of those findings. So for example, JP showed you earlier, how do you actually process those numbers, no? So you can calculate the mean, the mode, the median, or the correlation of the numbers that you're getting from your experimentation. So that's how you process the results. But then the interpretation part is where the discussion comes. So what's the meaning of those numbers? What are the meanings of your observations? And then lastly, as you put all of those interpretations together, the goal of your research project is to answer your research questions, no, from the very beginning. And so those answers to your research questions are what comprise your study's conclusions. So this is an entire process. And then, like we said, future work, if you haven't finished everything or if there are like still other questions that you weren't able to tackle in your 1 year of research, that's when you recommend some future work. All right. So sinabi ko kahapon, I said yesterday, review of literature is life. And one of the reasons why I really wanted to have this session for college students is to address yung misconception that, oh, I'm only gonna read the literature while I'm writing the proposal or at the very end of my thesis process, kapag sinusulat ko na yung manuscript ko. If you would really like to be successful at performing your college research and coming up with a compelling thesis, you have to keep in mind that you have to read the literature in every stage of your research project. So meaning, how do you leverage the open literature to write up a compelling introduction? So in your introduction, again, you are providing basis for your hypothesis. And like we said, where do you draw those hypotheses from? By learning from what others have done. And also by learning from what others have not done. So yung identifying yung pain points and yung problems, you get those by reading up the literature or by, interviewing people, getting information firsthand. Methods naman. So why is it very important to read up the literature as you are designing your study? So like JP highlighted yesterday, no? He said that when you are choosing what techniques or approach you're gonna be adapting for your experiments, it is best practice for you to adapt standard methods. So meaning these are proven techniques, these are proven methodologies that people use to generate data that are valid and reproducible. So if you're not reading up the literature, the likelihood of you picking the right method to perform the experiment and come up with meaningful data will be challenged. So dapat basa kayo ng basa. You don't have to, sinasabi din sa amin ito as scientists na you don't have to always reinvent the wheel. Kapag meron naman dyan na pwede mong gayahin, if there are methods out there that you can just adapt, you don't have to create an entirely new method. Kasi typically that is more resource and time intensive. And most especially if you're, again, only performing 1 year's worth of thesis work, then you don't have the luxury of time to develop your own method. Not unless you really are working on something that is super original. There's nothing out there that you can adapt or copy. Now, when it comes to findings, so when you get the data or the numbers, it's a question of how did you process the data, no? And or are you processing the data in such a way that the field or your chosen field of study would also accept or would validate. So dito na papasok yung statistical method, for example, that JP showed you earlier, no? So if you get 10 measurements, say like of the concentration of a toxin in a body of water, are you using the exact same methods for processing the data? That would resonate well with people who are experts in the field. So how do you know that? And how do you identify those methods? Again, by reading up the literature. So you take inspiration from what other people have been using and what works for them. When it comes to the discussion naman, so it's the context of the interpretation. So how do you know if your results are actually better? You know, like if you're making improvements in the understanding of a specific subject, so how do you make that comparison? Am I 50% better than, you know, like the performance of what other of the technology that other peoples have come up with? So you get those contexts by reading up the literature. So if you're developing a new medicine, how do you compare the efficacy? So you have to pick up a benchmark, and typically that benchmark would also come from a literature source, a literature report. So again, kung mapapansin nyo, lahat ng gagawin nyo sa thesis process, lahat ng steps at lahat ng sections of a thesis report that you're writing will include some form of review of literature. So this is not just, oh, I have an introduction, there's a review of literature section, then kailangan ko lang magbasa at even if the concepts are not related, I'm just gonna have to compile them into one kilometric section. No, that's not it. You have to make sure that what you're reading up in the literature is really helping make your study sensical. And then last and most importantly, when it comes to drawing your conclusions, you also have to base it upon the literature. Did you confirm your hypothesis? Again, did you contribute something that is unique, that is the first of its kind? For you to be able to substantiate those claims, you have to back them up with literature information. All right? So yun. So I'm hoping that after this, hindi nyo take for granted yung pagbabasa ng papers, no? Kasi you can really elevate the quality of your research and your manuscript if you read up the literature, if you always read. Okay, so let's start. Abstract. What is an abstract? So an abstract is an overview of the research that you have conducted. And so when you're writing up an abstract, so typically, I see students doing this differently, no? But an abstract shouldn't be a novel. Kasi it's an overview. So if you're writing up a 2-page abstract, not unless it's a dissertation. Sa dissertation, medyo mahirap siya, no? Na pwersahin. Kasi if it's 4 years worth of work. But if you're writing up a thesis that's like worth 1 year, and then you have to have like 2 pages of an abstract, that beats the purpose of having an overview page. So typically you limit this to 300 words or less. But then if you would dissect most abstracts that are written out there, there are 3 main parts to this. First of which is the background. So essentially, it answers the question of what problem needs to be solved and what has been done before. So first 2 sentences, ano yung problema, ano yung nagawa, ano pa hindi nagagawa. The second part of this is problem statement. What specific questions are you trying to address in the study that you are conducting or that you have conducted? And then third and last section of this is typically highlighting the key results and findings from your study. So essentially, you really are summarizing it. So in essence, if you're looking at this, an abstract should just be what? Like 4 to 6 sentences in an ideal case. And bakit ba tayo gumagawa ng ganito? So yung concept of elevator pitch, essentially, if someone asks you to summarize your research in just 1 to 2 minutes, it is your abstract. If you recite the abstract, they should understand the essence of what you've done and the results that you're contributing to your chosen field of study. So for example, if JP becomes a DOST secretary and I'm a professor in UP in the future, no, and I am proposing a specific study that I would like for JP to support in the form of funding, and I run into him in an elevator na, yung elevator to get to the top floor would take siguro 1.5 minutes. Pag tinanong ako ni JP, so, Jeff, ano yung research na ginagawa mo? And why should I support it? So, I should be able to recite or to pitch to JP yung essence ng research ko within just like 5 to 6 sentences. And that is your abstract. So pag na-deliver ko sa kanya, at the end of the elevator ride, dapat bago siya lumabas ng elevator, sasabihin niya, oy, maganda yung ginagawa mo. Sige, pag-usapan natin, I would support it. Alright? Alright. Okay. So this is an example. So dun sa case study na ginamit natin, what's the background of your study? So cancer has been a leading cause of deaths. Ang daming pag-aaral dyan. And the development of metal nanoparticles as anti-cancer drugs has been an active area of research, meaning mas nagiging trendy siya. So ano yung problem statement ko? So the study that I have performed identified cost-effective synthetic routes to gold nanoparticles. And in this study, we also explored the effect of size and morphology on the anti-cancer activity. And then key results. And then from this study, there are 2 main takeaways. So the first of which was we were able to develop a cheap and light-mediated colloidal synthesis of gold nanoparticles. And we have also demonstrated that if you make these nanoparticles in 5 to 10 nanometers, in vivo studies like in mice reveal that these nanoparticles were effective anti-cancer agent. So yun, tapos. And in your abstract, you can even decorate this with numbers. So if you can say that, oh yeah, the anti-cancer agent that we have developed is 50% more effective than the best system out there, you can also like decorate it without having to add, like a couple more sentences. So that's essentially the essence of a pitch. 5 sentences, tapos. All right. So introduction naman. So, what do you write in the introduction? So, typically, ito, pinasadahan ko na to kahapon, no? When it comes to ideation. So, yung discussion ko kahapon was more in the context of proposal writing. So, what's the conceptual framework of your study? So, an introduction or a conceptual framework typically covers 3 points. So, first of which is that it presents the study context and motivation. So what are you doing it for? Why is it important? And the secondly, explains relevant theories and knowledge and provides related developments that help establish the research question. So again, what's been done out there, what hasn't been done, and why your study will address those questions that have not been answered before. Bakit mo ito ginagawa? At ano yung gagawin? Ano yung gusto mong matutunan? So again, the main concept, the specific questions that you're trying to answer, and then thirdly, it states the research objectives and scope. So research objectives, ano ba yung outcome? Di ba sinabi namin kahapon, begin with the end in mind. What are you really trying to contribute by performing your study? And then, yung hinighlight ko din dito yung word na scope. So pag sinabi natin scope, what really are the activities or the questions that you're trying to answer? And when we also say scope, we also have to talk about aspects of the research that you will not work on. So dito sinasabi namin na dapat klaro.
May definition.
Yes. Kung for example, kung dun sa field na inaaral mo, merong 6 grand challenges, no? O when it comes to anti-cancer studies, ito yung research, ito yung 6 na challenges. You have to make it clear na yung study mo will only cover 3 and not the other 3. You know? So why is it very important that you have to be clear about the scope and limitation of your study? This is also, from a skills development perspective, this is also a way for you to learn about strategy. So meaning, do you have the resources and the capability to tackle the questions that you are aiming for? If in the beginning, in the proposal stage, you know na, oh, I only have 1 year, I can only afford to tackle 3 of the 6 grand challenges, then make it clear in your proposal. And also make it clear when you write up your introduction that this, so typically yung wording dyan is this study focused on. So ganun yun, focus on this and that. And then typically, And then some good writers would also say that, and this will also not cover aspects of this field that would cover this and that specific questions. So dapat klaro yan, no? All right. So dito, this is an example of an introduction. So background. So ano ba yung itatakil natin sa background? This is a rehash of yesterday. What the research is about? Are there literature information that can help define the problem? And then the relevance of you studying this specific aspect of that topic. So as an example, dito, so yung first sentence na pwede nyo ilagay dyan is cancer remains to be one of the leading causes of death in the world. You can even use statistics na nasa literature. So to make it actually, like, siguro measurable, no? Measurable yung challenge and the impact as well. Second, na idadagdag nyo yung available literature. So development of cheap and effective anti-cancer drugs can significantly decrease cancer deaths. So you can also like pick up etong mga relevance nung study ninyo from literature kasi there should be like some meaningful statistics that people are offering when they report kung ano ba yung results ng kanilang studies in papers. And then you can also allude to like reports revealing why your chosen material, which are gold nanoparticles, have promising anti-cancer properties. So dun pa lang sa beginning nung inyong introduction, again, for you to be able to come up with a compelling justification as to why you should work on this, dun kayo huhugot sa review of literature. You're not doing this through inference na, oh, I'm interested in gold nanoparticles without having any basis. I just think or I just believe that this will do this and this will do that. If that's how you write it up, you won't be able to establish confidence from the readers that what's the basis? Why are they doing this for? So there has to be a basis. There has to be a foundation for your idea. Ayun. So that's, again, literature reading. Okay. So typically sa middle of an introduction, you just have to further expound on why you're doing it and what you're trying to do. So dito napapasok yung further pag-summon ng mga nabasa nyo sa open literature. So contextualizing ano yung conventional knowledge and recent progress in the area. Yung sinabi ko kahapon, state-of-the-art system. So before you perform your study, what is the best system out there? What is the best understanding of that particular subject? And in doing so, pag kino-compare nyo yung mga nagawa na, it is your way of also establishing yung novelty. Ano yung bago sa ginagawa mo? And you cannot just say na bago to kasi feeling ko lang bago because I think this is bago. You cannot establish novelty without comparing it with reported studies out there that are accepted by experts in the field. So ganun yun. Ang dami kong nakikitang ganito na, oh, this is gonna be cost effective. Sa proposal, this is gonna be cost effective. So how did you know? Even sa proposal stage, wala silang back of the envelope calculation man lang of the typical cost of the best system out there. So again, dito papasok yung you are claiming the benefits based on verifiable information or medyo nagyayabang ka lang. Parang medyo may hangin, dinadaan mo sa hangin. This will be the best system out there. Best compared to what? So yun yung gusto nating i-establish. So what makes your study unique and important in the context of what has been done out there and approved in the literature. So for example dito, so when you're talking about the effect of size uniformity, then you should invoke studies showing that, okay, size uniformity of transition metals make more effective anti-cancer drugs. So hindi mo lang sasabihin na, ay, gusto ko lang ng size uniform kasi maganda silang tingnan. It has to come from somewhere. It has to take inspiration from what others have done. Recent advances in nanoparticle synthesis methodology suggest that there are cheaper precursors and milder conditions that can be employed. No? So you can come up with an original approach, but then again, if you are selling this idea in the form of a proposal, or if you are really contextualizing why you chose to look into cheaper precursors or milder conditions, kumbaga mas magkakaroon ng tiwala sa iyo yung mga tao kasi ay nagbasa siya. Talagang sinuyod niya yung literature to make sure na yung approach nila is tama. Alright. And then at the end of an introduction is where you give emphasis to your hypothesis and your study scope. So, hypothesis, what are the questions that you're trying to answer? Ano yung assumptions mo that you're trying to validate at the end of your project? So, dito mo rin sasabihin na ito yung objective ng study. For example, if you're right, yung report mo is in the form of the proposal pa. So, ano yung intended outcome? And then scope. Again, dun mo sasabihin yan sa dulo. So, ano yung kino-cover and what you are not covering in your research. So, this is an example. So, study objective. So, this study explored the synthesis of size-uniform gold nanoparticles and their evaluation as anti-cancer drugs. So, yun, klaro. Ano yung gagawin nyo? And then scope. This study, however, focused on cost-effective synthesis of 5 to 10 nanometer gold nanoparticles and testing their anti-cancer properties in mice. So by saying that, klaro na sa kanila na anything smaller than 5 nanometers hindi kasama. Anything bigger than 10 nanometers hindi rin kasama. Diba yan? So hindi nyo kailangang umabot pa sa discussion para malaman nila, ayun pala yung ginagawa nila. Alright? So you can paint a clear picture of what you really are trying to do in the introduction section without really having to make it, like a kilometric composition. All right? All right, so questions. So before tayo mag-proceed sa next section, any questions about IMRAD, about writing up an abstract and an introduction? Let's spend a few minutes muna dito.
And it's very important to get familiar with this structure kasi kahit sa kapunta sa research articles, kahit anumang journal, yan, ganito yung structure ng research paper, even your thesis. It adapts the IMRAD structure.
Yep. All right.
And even sa mga, di ba? Even sa mga business proposals, di ba? It resembles.
It's actually the same.
Right?
It's the same.
Yeah.
Even in business proposals, it's essentially the same. They might call the different sections differently, but in essence, it's following the same structure. So, pwedeng conceptual framework, pwedeng justification, but then in essence, kung alam mo that, okay, these are the typical structures of a business pitch, it's going to be very similar to a proposal.
Yeah. And it's the same thing.
Yeah, what is a project report or what is a business report typically is very similar to a thesis. It's very similar to a journal article because it also talks about outcome, learnings, improvement area. So again,
hindi lang pala sa thesis ko to magagamit. Kahit umalis ako sa university, makakarry out ko yung skill na to on how to deliver.
So the term is transferable skill. So sa mga estudyante dito, no, baka maisip nyo, ay, ba't ko to kailangan seryosohin? Pang thesis lang naman to. No.
Yeah.
If you take all of these activities to heart, yung mga matututunan nyo dito, magagamit nyo sila wherever you go in life. Whether you become a politician, whether you become an entrepreneur, whether you become, like a medical professional, all of these skills that we're teaching you are transferable. And these are also like essential skills na highlighted din that would be needed by the future workforce over the next 20, 30, and 50 years. So again, creativity, critical thinking, and communication. And bakit din namin ito ginagawa? Talagang focus rin sa mga kasamahan natin sa Pilipinas and in Southeast Asian countries. It is also mainly because of our hierarchical culture that it's actually very difficult to be very creative and question the status quo if we're used to just bowing down to our superiors. It is very difficult to communicate, especially in the presence of those that we deem superior to us. So this is our mechanism para baliin yun.
Yeah.
To challenge those notions as well, in the sense that the reason why highly progressive countries are able to become prosperous is also mainly because they have a fairly creative population.
Yeah.
Their populations are also able to communicate their ideas more broadly to influence, the larger demographic. Yun po yun. So, again, ito, kasi yung tinuturo namin ni JP, the reason why hindi kami yung book approach in teaching you how to write a research paper or how to conduct research is that you can get that from everywhere. But it really is like in the context of how you practice it and how you succeed. Then doon kami nagfo-focus. And how you succeed is not just based on the theoretical but on the skills that you need to have. Because once you're already performing your study, when you run into challenging parts of the experimentation, you cannot always go to the book kasi the book doesn't have all the answers. What's gonna make you successful are the skills and the mindset, no? What am I really doing this for? Why do I have to analyze the data? Why do I have to check the literature to come up with a reasonable claim? So yun. Ay mukhang mukhang hindi siguro sila nahihirapan, ano? Wala silang, ayan, may si Haron. For me, my own opinion also, the thesis is very important. It is one of the most important concepts in college expository writing. A thesis sentence focuses your ideas for the paper. It's your argument, your insight, or viewpoint. Crystallize it to a single sentence that gives the reader your main idea. So siguro ito yung thesis statement, yung pagkaka-describe niya, no? But then, yung broader context ng pagsusulat ng thesis, yung thesis manuscript mo talaga, it actually, aligns with yung binanggit niya, that you have to be able to organize yung information that you gathered up from 1 year's worth of work. But then most importantly, a thesis is your mechanism to clearly and concisely communicate yung lessons na natutunan mo. Diba? Diba? Mahirap kasi to mahirap magsulat. Kasi, for example, if you worked for a year, and all you have to do is write up 5 pages to summarize everything that you've done, it's not easy. Partly because you are attached to the work and effort that you had exerted. So may part sa atin na, they have to know everything that I did kasi I worked. But then, that's not it. So you're writing up a thesis, like I said earlier, to inform and to make it easier for your readers to understand what you did. So you're not writing it for yourself, you're actually writing it to educate a broader group of people. Right. So
Dagdagan ko lang itong sinabi ni Sir Haron kasi sabi niya, he mentioned here like his personal argument or insight on that specific topic. So hopefully, yung mga katulad na sinabi ni Kuya Jeff, yung personal argument mo or insight or viewpoint is backed by solid evidence. And that's why it's really important to have the review of related literature.
In every step of the way. All right? Okay, now, so mabalik naman tayo. So mukhang wala silang tanong about abstract writing and about introduction writing. So punta naman tayo sa materials and methods. So ano ba yung materials and methods? So this is actually or we also call this the experimental section of a scientific report or of a thesis. So this section describes the materials and experimental procedures that you used and implemented to gather your data. So ito yung lahat ng ginawa mo. So if doon sa exam, so this can this should cover yung sample preparation. So if you perform some experiments, how did you prepare all of the materials? You also have to talk about specifications of the materials that you use. So for example, if you use chemicals, what's the purity of the chemical that you use? So for example, water, did you use tap water? Did you use the ionized water? Did you use water at a specific pH? So kailangan i-document nyo yan. Why is that? Kasi sinabi natin kanina that when you write up your research, people have to be able to reproduce or repeat your data. So part of making your study repeatable is by you clearly documenting everything that you did. The same holds true for the instruments that you use. So for example, if JP is measuring pH, for example, of water, so did you use a pH meter or did you use a pH electrode? So digital ba yan or yung pH paper lang ang gagamitin mo? So dapat klaro kayo doon. You also have to talk about experimental techniques that you use and the standard test methods. So meron pa akong typo error doon, hindi siya methods. So did you adapt an established way of doing the experiment na nagawa na ng iba or did you design your own method? So you have to make it clear. Sample sizes. So, gaya na sinabi kanina, so how many samples did you collect to measure your data and come up with this descriptive statistics to back up your study? Number of replicates, for example. Experimental conditions. When you did your measurements, what's the temperature? What's the temperature level in the lab where you worked at? So, dapat lahat yan, as you perform the experiments, you should be documenting those because it is also your responsibility to make sure that when I read up, for example, as a reader, yung inyong methodology, pag binasa ko yun at ginawa ko sa lab, parehas ng resulta tayo. Kahit magkaiba tayo ng lab, kahit nasa Pilipinas ka o nasa Amerika ako. Variables that you studied, for example, concentration of chemicals, the time period over which you perform the experiments. And then yung sinabi ni Kuya JP nyo kahapon, which is very important and you should never forget to do, would be the controlled experiments. You know, like how did you verify that your positive result is not a false positive result? How did you make sure that you did not have interferences that could have given you a wrong outcome or a misleading outcome? So all these have to be documented in your materials and methods. And then best practices. So two of my favorite words that JP shared from yesterday and earlier, repeatability and validity. So tatandaan nyo yan, always keep those in mind. So best practices, your materials and methods should be detailed enough that other researchers can perform the same experiments and reproduce your results. So I'm quite repetitive on this, mainly because we have seen a lot of papers, even at the PhD level, where people would write up methodologies and they are actually, and there are details that are missing out. So meaning, if I perform it, I don't even know how they performed it. Like the manner, paano ba yung pag-add ng chemicals, for example, which one was added first? So even down to those levels of details, you have to share them. It's your responsibility to the scientific community. And then the materials and methods, when you're writing this up, of course, this has to be written in the right tense. So meaning, if you're writing up your materials and methods sections as part of a proposal, so dapat nasa future tense siya. And then, if you're writing up a scientific report summarizing the entire research process and outcomes, it has to be in the past tense. So ito, dito rin kami nagugulat minsan kasi pagdating na nung thesis or nung publication, minsan nasa future tense pa yung materials and methods. So make sure that you write up the narrative in the right verb tense. So mahalaga yan, para hindi nalilito yung magpapasa sa inyo. Parang, ay gagawin pa lang ba? Bakit may result na? Diba? Ganun yun. Alright, so these are examples, no? For example, dun sa ating gold nanoparticle synthesis to make anti-cancer drugs. So, putting ourselves in the shoes of the person doing those experiments, ano ba yung dapat? What information should they put in the materials and methods section? So, for example, if I am synthesizing those materials, what I would start first would be the specifications of reagents and instruments that we use. So for example, I have to specify the purity and manufacturer of reagents. No? So for example, if JP used up gold chloride from Sigma Aldrich, that's 99.999% pure, you have to make it known. Kasi if you really are trying to reproduce the data, then you're setting yourself up to a higher chance of reproducing the data by getting the exact same grade. Eh kung hindi ko alam na 99.999% pure pala yung ginamit ni JP at ang binili ko ay technical grade na 98%. So there could be that 2% impurity na that could make my experiment fail. So if I don't know that and I get like a different result, then I would be questioning JP without really knowing that, hey, meron deviation sa ginawa mo, there's a difference. Yun, gold chloride, for example, the type and size of glassware that we use. So if, for example, if JP is using a 1-liter flask, then I am much more equipped to get the exact same results if I know that that's the same thing, that the same glassware that he used. Lab apparatus and equipment that we used, For heating, for example, and for stirring the reaction. So did JP use a stirring plate? So did they have a magnetic stirring, and was he stirring it at like 2,000 RPM? Eh kung 2,000 yung kanya at ang gamit ko lang pala ay 500 RPM, eh di magkaiba na yun. So again, all these trivial aspects of how you perform the experiments, they actually matter. So you have to document and be very transparent when you're writing up your study. So for example, experimental techniques. Ano ba yung ginamit? Dun sa study, there are two techniques that they explored, hydrothermal techniques. So meaning, they use water as solvent and then heat, hydro and thermal. Yung isa namang method na ginamit din is colloidal synthesis. So meaning, gumamit sila ng organic solvents and chemicals that they call to be templating agents. So kung hindi nyo i-clarify na ito yung two different methods na ginamit namin, baka malito rin sila. Ano ba yung basehan? Bakit din yung ginamit nilang formulation? Did they just invent it? And when you call it like the specific techniques, they can also research on it. Mas maiintindihan nila na, if colloidal synthesis is what I'm doing, these are the sensitivities that I have to be mindful. So meaning, pag ginawa ko yung experiment na yun, alam ko na, ay dapat careful ako sa part na to. Ayan. Number of replicates. So how many times did the synthesis, was the synthesis done? So was it done 3 to 5 times? You can also do the experiments 5 times and compare the yields, no? So ano ba yung average yield? But ano ba yung standard deviation? Gano'n ba ka-spread out yung yields nyo? Pwede, ang range nyo ba kung ang average mo is 25%, baka naman yung range mo ay 10 to 50, nag-average lang. So skewed ba yung result mo? So yun yung mga bagay that you have to make sure na nandun sa materials and methods. Experimental conditions and variable studied. So concentrations, manner or sequence ng addition. Did I add the gold chloride first before sodium citrate, or is it the other way around? Or sabay ba? Reaction time. Did I do the synthesis for an hour, 2 hours, overnight, for a week? Temperatures, and all the control experiments that you did. So again, and how can you make this an easy undertaking for you? What you have to do is you have to ensure that you document everything in a lab notebook. So pagkagawa nyo, you are writing everything down in a lab notebook. And if you don't document your work that well, it's gonna be a nightmare. Pag nagsusulat na kayo ng thesis, kasi ano ang ginawa ko dito? Ano nga pala yung weights na ginamit ko? So dapat again, best practice para madali ang pagsulat ng thesis is by maintaining a laboratory notebook. Keep it updated. Okay, now, pag mag-synthesize ka ng materials, you also have to characterize them. So what methods did you actually use to characterize the product? So una-una, purity. So in the case of gold nanoparticles, did you do elemental or compositional studies? So, and what methods can you use? Did you use combustion analysis? Did you use thermogravimetric analysis? Did you use ICP? And since you're also looking at size uniformity, how did you measure size and shapes? So did you use imaging? So did you use SEM or tunneling electron microscopy? Did you measure size distribution? How many are 5 nanometers, 6, 10, or anything bigger and smaller than that? So you have to specify the method by which you measure these properties. And then when it comes to the evaluation of the anti-cancer properties, paano nyo ba siya ginawa? Did you use human cancer cells? So dun sa sinabi ko kanina sa proposal part, ginamit natin ay mice. So in vivo studies in mice. So this is just as an example, no? How detailed should your methodology be written? All right. Questions so far about writing up your research experimental or your materials and methods? And then siguro, JP, is there anything that you can actually share from your own experience of writing up?
Napaka-importante yung details kasi makikita natin sa mga journal articles na binabasa natin, even the brand of the purity and the supplier of the reagents are stated there. The instruments that is used, kung ano yung brand ng instrument, and even the year, I think.
Yung model, it's also
the model. Yeah.
Kasi minsan parehas man yung instrument, quote-unquote.
Iba yung capabilities nila.
Oo, minsan yung sensitivity. Pag bagong-bago yung ginamit ni JP, mas sensitive siya. So yung accuracy nung measurement mo could be higher. So that's the reason why kailangan aalamin niyo yung mga details na yun. Kasi if you're done writing it and you're very sloppy, you'll be prone to getting questioned. So pagdudukaan ka ng mga tao mainly because they did it but they're not getting the same results that you reported. And that could be, and the deviation from your results could be a result of you not really giving them all the details that they had to learn to do it the exact same way. So key to repeatability and reproducibility is that they are using the exact same techniques and methods and tools. So same. Hindi yung pwede na.
You really can't overstate it, no? So, well, it's better to err on the side of like overstating things, like understating.
Yes.
Connects with understating.
All right.
Wala akong nakikitang question.
Oo, it's either naiintindihan sila or wala silang naiintindihan.
Hopefully, but yeah, I think you hammered down the message quite well.
All right. So Imrad, after your methodology is your results section. Okay, now so this is like one thing that I would also like to mention. Depending on what you're writing up, no, and sa preferred format ng inyong institution, there are some kumbaga preferred format na separate yung results and discussion section. But then meron din that would merge them, results and discussion. So the way I'm actually doing it in this particular case study is that we're separating the results and the discussion section. Para yung mas mahirap na approach, yun yung matutunan nyo, no? And madali kasi pag pinag-merge yung results and discussion, it just becomes one straight narrative. So if you have to write a separate results section, what should be in there? So a results section presents the study findings in a meaningful form. So bakit ko sinabing meaningful? Yung result section nyo should not have the raw, kung meron kang 100 raw data, hindi mo ilalagay din yung 100 raw data. That is not how you write up your result section. So the result section should present the data in a summarized manner. So meaning, gagamit ka ng tables and graphical summary of the data. If you have images to represent the outcome, you should include those images. If you have spectra, so meaning plots ng data showing yung relationship ng mga variables, you should also be showing them. And then what typically follows after these summarized version of your data would be a brief statement of the results. So referring to the tables, the graphs, and the images that you're attaching to it. And then yung sinabi ko, di ba, kanina, kung 1 year yung trabaho mo, baka ang dami mong data. Paano po yun, Sir Jeff? You know, I have 10 months worth of work and I'm only highlighting the most important part or the key data. What happens about the other ones? So extraneous or related data can be presented in the appendix section. So you can still document them, but then it has to be in the appendix. Kasi yung sinabi ko kanina, a thesis should be a clear and concise communication of what you learned from your study. So meaning, you cannot talk about everything. What you have to do is like highlight ano ba yung key results that you gathered up. Okay, so most of these will make sense given the examples that I will give you using our case study. No? So yung first example here is a tabulation of the outcome of the synthesis. So do you remember I mentioned earlier that there are two synthesis methods that the experimenter explored, or the thesis student explored. The first of which was the colloidal synthesis using organic templates and solvents, and then hydrothermal using using water as solvent, and then temperature to affect the synthesis of gold nanoparticles. So dito sa example na to, kinabulate ano ba yung dalawang methods na ginamit, what were their respective yields, and then selectivity to 5 to 10 nanometer size particle. So di ba sinabi kanina dun sa problem statement that, or dun sa focus ng study na this is focusing on 5 to 10 nanometers. So essentially, ano yung method that would produce mostly 5 to 10 nanometers? So kung dito makikita nyo, Though from a yields perspective, mas lamang yung hydrothermal synthesis, only 45% of the product have the right size that you're targeting. So meaning, from what you can actually see from the tabulation of the key results, yung description that you can give in this section is that colloidal synthesis using gold 3-chloride and sodium citrate afforded a higher yield of 5 to 10 nanometer particles. So yun, dinescribe mo kung ano ba talaga yung key takeaway from the summary of your data. Now, since hindi pa dito kasama yung discussion, yung interpretation ninyo as to why colloidal synthesis is better, dun nyo siya gagawin sa discussion section. All right. Again, you have to be able to summarize your data in a meaningful form, and then you also have to be able to highlight ano ba yung key information that you would like for your reader to take away from the data. All right. Now, so, di ba yield yung pinag-uusapan and the right size. So how do you measure size? So yung measurement ng size typically is done using a form of imaging. And then there are also like methods by which you can measure and like count yung density ng iba't ibang sizes. So dito napapasok yung tinatawag natin na size distribution. So dito, you can actually present that data kasi pag pinakita mo naman yung image, hindi mo naman pwedeng, oh, reader, bilangin mo ilan yung 5 nanometers. They cannot do that. So the way you do it is you actually present the distribution na this is, for example, the distribution of the different gold nanoparticle sizes if you use colloidal synthesis. And from the description, you can actually say that under optimal conditions, colloidal synthesis using gold chloride and sodium citrate gave the highest yield of gold nanoparticles within the desired range of 5 to 10 nanometers. You can even say that about, ano yung number kanina? 77%. Or 77% of all these particles are within 5 to 10 nanometers. So again, you're using visuals and then as well as numbers to highlight to them that, okay, given the different methods that we use, this is the best based on our data. Ayun. And then again, you don't have to drum up or like offer the fundamental explanation as to why, kasi dun yung sa discussion. And then again, summarizing. So one aspect of the material that you're trying to develop as well is shape, diba? So aside from size, ano ba yung shape? So based dun sa imaging, this is an example, this is a hypothetical image, hindi naman ito yung itsura ng SEM, ng TEM images, for example, or SEM images, but then you can attach pictures to it, and then you can describe it. So light-mediated colloidal synthesis using gold chloride and sodium citrate produced globular or spherical gold nanoparticles. So parang bilog, para pala siyang bilog-bilog pala yung nanoparticles na form. Hindi pala siya yung typical na cubic structure that you would observe in other forms of material. So again, you have to make sure that you have all the necessary visuals to highlight ano ba yung importanteng results mo, and then brief description lang in the results section. Okay, now the discussion part is essentially the more challenging one to write up. Kasi ano ba yung discussion? So this discussion section presents the interpretation of the study result. So given that you saw those numbers, the yields, the size distribution, the shapes, ang tanong, anyari, bakit ganon? Diba? Why did we get those numbers? How did we come? What's the reason behind those observations and results? So the discussion section essentially like states the study findings and their interpretation. So are the data that you're getting supporting your hypothesis? Are they explaining or answering the research questions that you framed in the beginning? And in case it supports the hypothesis, and it's a question of why. If your data does not support the hypothesis, then why does it not support the hypothesis? So hindi lang yung this is the data and consistent with the hypothesis. That's a meaningless discussion. So you have to be able to offer an explanation as to why. You have to make sense of the numbers. So the discussion is also a booster. So essentially, what you do in this section is that given your data and your observations, you have to be able to compare and contrast your observations with what others have observed. You have to be able to compare your numbers with the numbers that others gathered from related studies. So again, compare and contrast. Dito, ito yung klase ng pagkukumpara na dapat ginagawa nyo based on results, no? So versus yung kumparahan sa among friends. Yan. So this is objective comparison and contrasting. So this is the healthy way of doing it. All right. And then thirdly, in order for you to come up with a compelling discussion, you have to be able to leverage related literature in the field. So unang-una, why do we do this? Why do we have to read up the literature and invoke what others have reported? So that's just to establish confidence in your results. So how do you establish confidence? Unang-una, if your result is actually very similar to what others have reported, then meaning, oh, okay, meron akong kapareha. So there's consistency in our observations. It might be a different system, but the outcome is the same, then therefore the explanation could also be very similar. Establish confidence in your results. If you are trying to make improvements in a particular technology by addressing yung challenges or pain points dun sa current technology, you can say that, oh, given the exact same conditions, when we compared the performance of their system versus our system, ours performed 25% better than theirs. So you wouldn't be able to measure yung 25% improvement if you're not reading up the literature. Again, that's how you establish confidence. Or if your finding is that this thing is inferior, how do you measure that? How do you measure inferiority? That their system is better than yours by about 30%. So it can also go the other way around. Hindi lang yung kapag maganda yung result, establishing confidence. You can also offer non-ideal or inferior results, but contextualizing it around others na, ay maniwala kayo dito sa sinasabi namin na hindi to ganun ka-effective based sa nagawa ng iba. Alright? So reading up the literature also helps support your conclusions. We have a few slides to focus on that. It also offers explanations for unexpected outcomes. So again, di ba sabi natin, begin with the end in mind. Of course, when you're planning for your study, you have an intended outcome. What if what you get is the opposite of what you expect? And if you realize that at the end of your thesis, you don't have another year to do it all over again. So a way to explain your unexpected outcome, given that you cannot do further experimentation, is by reading up the literature and trying to get alternative explanations to your outcome. So again, yung pagbabasa hindi lang para makasulat kayo ng 10 pages pampahaba ng thesis. You're really using it to elevate the quality of your conclusions and claims. And then highlight the novelty of the results. So I've mentioned that like in the earlier slides. Okay, so ito yung mga example. So for example, dun sa comparison ng colloidal at saka ng hydrothermal synthesis, no? So yung yung nasa inyo result section, colloidal synthesis afforded the higher yield of 5 to 10 nanometer gold nanoparticles. So how do you establish confidence in that outcome? So by reading up the literature, so the writer found out that this observation is consistent with the study performed by the Mateo Group in Stanford University, where they employed both hydrothermal and colloidal synthesis in preparing palladium and silver nanoparticles. In the same study, they concluded that colloidal synthesis allows for better control of the growth of nanoparticles. So meaning, yun na-observe dun sa study ay consistent dun sa nagawa ng mga professor sa Stanford. By the way, Mateo Group, that's actually a real group in Stanford, and friend ko yung graduate dyan. Kaya I'm using that as an example, no? So,
Ako si Martin Mateo.
Kaya hindi yan si Martin Mateo. Italiano to, hindi to Pinoy. Ayan, so ganun yun. So if you observe that, if you have that data, how do you establish confidence na consistent to? Na dapat yung paniwalaan. So that's by invoking what others found out in the literature. All right. Example naman, when it comes to anti-cancer, when it comes to yung size. So under optimal conditions, yung sinabi nyo sa result section kanina, synthesis of colloidal synthesis using gold chloride and sodium citrate gave the highest yield of gold nanoparticles within the desired size range. You can also mention as an explanation based on the literature that efficient nanoparticle size control was also demonstrated by the ONIA group. in the colloidal synthesis of gold nanoparticles using organothiols. So organothiols is an organic templating agent. So this suggests that gold and silver nanoparticles undergo similar nucleation mechanism. So nucleation, paano ba na-form yung mga particles? Paano ba nagsasama-sama yung gold or yung silver particles to form nanostructures? So kasi, kung doon lang sa observation nyo ng outcome na 5 to 10 nanometers, bakit nga ganun yung nangyari? So you can offer yung fundamental explanation kung bakit ganun yung outcome nyo by again invoking what other peoples have done, what other people have done to explain your result. Ganun rin when it comes naman to the size or shape of your nanoparticle. So dun yung observation nyo is globular. Ito naman yung sagot ni yung study ni JP. So through the Onya group, though the Onya group reported the same similar size, so 5 to 10 nanometers rin yung na-form nila, the use of organothiol reagents resulted in the formation of cubic gold nanoparticles. But then for the study that's being written up, they used sodium citrate. So this suggests that the nature of the organic reducing agent or templating agent affects nanoparticle growth mechanism. So JP used a thiol, I used sodium citrate, mag-iba yung shape. Yung kanya cubic, yung akin globular. So by comparing and contrasting yung differences or similarities sa ginawa niya, sa ginawa ko, you can also like make sense of the difference in the shape or of the property of the final product. So again, ganun yun. There are times that you won't be able to offer your own fundamental mechanistic pathway for how you got to the results, but by comparing your outcomes or your methods with what others have done, you can infer, like based on conjecture, you can offer what we call a probable and reasonable explanation to your results. Ayan. So, siguro, ito naman, bago tayo pumunta sa conclusions part, curious ako, what's your approach in writing the results and discussion section? No? So, based sa inyong experience, paano nyo ito ginagawa? Baka kasi meron kami matututunan sa inyo.
Yeah, but before that, meron ako na-receive na question from Rene Alvin. Sabi niya, in the discussion, pwede din po ba to tie the results to the theory used aside from empirical findings on previous studies?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Definitely, right.
Definitely. Yeah. So you can actually frame it in such a way that, okay, these were the results that we obtained, which is consistent with this theory.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how you can contextualize your result rin. Hindi naman siya yung kailangan na, ay, kasi ito based din dun sa result ng iba. Kasi if you're working on something that is quite new, and there's not a lot of related literature that you can actually pull empirical data from for benchmarking, you can also contextualize your explanation in the context of theory.
Yeah.
Dito nga din papasok, for example, if you're doing some experiments and your explanation is based on computational studies. And this is something that JP, for example, is also doing. He's inventing new catalytic materials that have never been made before. And so therefore, there's not much precedent, like prior work that he can refer to explain his answers. And the way you do it is by doing computational modeling. So in a way, that's the theoretical aspect of it, that from a first principle standpoint, it makes sense.
Yeah.
Parang ganun yun. So I'm glad that you brought that up. So again, yung pag-contextualize from empirical data from the literature, but in the absence of that, you can also allude to theory. What makes fundamental sense? And then, syempre, you have to clarify it as well that, okay, this is consistent with this theory, but again, it's based on a theory.
Yeah.
Yun. So, ganun yun. So,
what deviates from theory?
You have to be very clear rin sa pagbibigay ng disclaimer. Kasi baka mamaya, and di ba iba kasi yung law, iba yung established na scientific law sa scientific theory. So you have to also be very clear in providing context na this makes a lot of sense. right? In the absence of related empirical data. All right.
Yeah.
I like that question. That was like a very great question. All right. Okay, so we have, I think we'll be able to finish this right on time. So conclusion section. So this is like one of the most difficult, to be honest, one of the most difficult parts to write up. So the conclusion section is essentially the summary of findings that answer the research questions and objectives. So it answers the study elements or the research questions expressed in the introduction, di ba? Typically, meron kang 3 main objectives or 3 main scientific or research questions. Your conclusion should answer those. Yun yung pinakasimpleng explanation na pwede kong maibigay sa inyo. Whatever hypothesis you mentioned in the introduction should be answered or validated in your conclusions. If you're not doing that, it beats the purpose of writing up a conclusion. And then, since sinabi dito, it's a summary, so it should also be brief, just like an abstract. Hindi siya yung discussion version 2.0. So again, a summary should be brief. And then optional, only if you can offer follow-up experiments or continuation of the work to improve your study, right? If you recognize that there are certain elements that you weren't able to cover, then you should highlight those. That though we were able to cover only like 3 of the 5 most important questions in this area, we also recommend that future researchers should also explore those to paint a more complete understanding of that particular field. So now, talking about essential skills, drawing conclusions requires critical thinking and most importantly, objectivity. Yun bang are your claims backed by data? That's it. Or do you have enough data to justify your claims? So meaning, don't claim 5 if you only have observed 2. That's it. Or you see the point that I'm trying to claim here. So don't claim the entire universe if what you have proof is only enough to explain the solar system.
Yeah.
And this is something that we often observe in students. And this is also the responsibility of thesis advisors to make sure that the students see the importance of objectivity. You can only claim what you have proven. You cannot claim anything that you don't have anything to show for as evidence.
Yeah. And you also mentioned kanina yung notion ng scope, di ba? Kasi sinasabi mo yan. So, pagdating sa conclusion, you will state explicitly that your results na yan would only apply to that certain scope.
Yes. Actually, I can give you an example. I was asked to provide guidance to some science investigatory project students competing sa high school, no? And they were claiming that, this particular robot will be more cost effective than the typical technologies that they are using. So ganun na, may cost effectiveness. Nung tinanong ko, asan yung cost comparison nyo? Wala silang maipakita. So sabi ko, so why are you claiming this? Wala kayong estimation. So again, don't do that. Don't claim anything that you don't have any basis for or you don't have any proofs to justify, your claim or conclusion. So again, objectivity. Aside from questioning your results, you should also make sure that you have enough proof to claim something. All right, best practices when writing up your conclusion. So these are guide questions that I would encourage for you to keep in mind when you are writing up your conclusion. So first, do my resources provide consistent evidence? Yung bang mga experiments na binigay nyo, do you have enough to claim that, oh, okay, if I measured 5 samples of, the water in Laguna de Bay, are my results enough to draw a sweeping generalization about the overall state of the lake? Or would my results only be able to represent 25% of the lake at a specific depth. So ganun yung siya iisipin, no? Hanggang saan lang ba yung inferential conclusion that you can claim out of the data that you're getting? So, and then secondly, are there conflicts in the evidences? So, meaning if you get 10 results and only 6 of them are agreeing to your hypothesis, do you only talk about the 6? Or do you also acknowledge the fact that, oh, out of the 10 results that we got, about 60% of the outcome supports this hypothesis. So sometimes the conclusion could be that the data are inconclusive. And you should be comfortable enough to acknowledge that further studies need to be done because the results that we got are not statistically meaningful. You should be comfortable enough to acknowledge that. Don't cherry pick, no? So again, if you have 10 results and 6 of them are consistent with what you're expecting, hindi yung, ay, itago na lang natin yung 4. That's called cherry picking and ang daming gumagawa niyan. Kahit pagdating na sa professional level, don't do that. That's unethical.
Unethical, yeah.
Second question, do I have sufficient evidence to support every conclusion I have drawn? So gaya nga sinabi ko kanina, if you're claiming 5, make sure that you have 5 proofs. If you only have 2 solid evidences, then only make claims consistent with those 2 evidences that you have. All right. Are my conclusions based on reproducible empirical studies or data? Again, yung cherry picking. So kung 10 attempts nyo, tas 5 lang yung gumana, huwag nyo sasabihin na, ay, this is consistent. This is like highly reproducible. That is wrong. Next, are my information sources credible? So when you are actually contextualizing your claims, baka mamaya yung papers na sources ng information nyo ay predatory. So meaning, na-publish yung paper na hindi naman pala credible yung source. So again, you also have to keep these in mind. We actually talked about this in our review of related literature webinar. You can find it in Zoom. So we also shared like how you can actually spot predatory or unverifiable or non-credible sources of information. Is there anyone in the intended audience to challenge them? So you also have to keep in mind that when you're writing up your thesis and when you come up with a claim, you also have to think forward. Are the experts in the field going to accept this? Do I have enough information to challenge or to answer them if they question or if they're skeptical about my results? So dito papasok yung peer reviewing, no? So before i-publish yung paper ninyo or yung manuscript ninyo, it has to be analyzed or assessed by experts in the field. So when you write up your conclusion, you have to make sure that this makes a whole lot of sense and I have evidence to convince them that this is legitimate. You can trust the data and my conclusions. Second, have I presented evidence-based and logical conclusions? So yung data mo ba consistent sa conclusion mo? So you have to keep that in mind kasi gaya nga nung sinabi ko kanina, nagki-claim na cost effective, wala naman silang data. So ano yung logic behind that claim? Diba? It cannot be intuition. We don't use intuition as our basis for making claims in science. All right. Have I covered major sources of information on my topic? So dito na rin papasok yung sino ba yung credible groups in the field? Kasi typically that's I'm not saying that that's the only way to verify your data, but that's a safer way, like to better contextualize your study. But then of course, if you're coming up with something that has never been done before, perhaps to prove the other point, ganun rin yung magiging approach. Ano ba yung mga nagawa ng iba to show that what I have come up with is unique? And typically, kapag hindi kayo sure kung nabasa niyo na lahat sa literature, dito tayo dapat medyo clear sa pag-contextualize nung inyong conclusion na minsan mababasa niyo yung mga conclusion nagsasabi na to the best of my knowledge, this is our conclusion, or to the best of our research, this is what we are claiming. So that is also like showing people that you have done your due diligence of checking ano ba yung conventional knowledge, no? All right. Next, have I discovered and recommended aspects of the research that can be pursued in the future? So I have already tackled that earlier. Have I consulted my peers for cold eyes perspective and have they recognized the validity of my conclusion? So this is best practice, no? Before you present your conclusions or before you submit your thesis for review of your committee, try to get your friends or those who are experts in the field outside of the approving panel to read it up, because they might be able to offer a cold eyes perspective. They might see things that you're not seeing. They might ask questions that would help you elevate the quality of your conclusion. So hindi lang yung kayo magbabasa. And oftentimes, ito sakit to ng mga author, no, ng nagsusulat ng manuscript. Everything makes sense in our head. So for you to be able to figure out if your writing is really very effective and if you're doing solid conclusions, ipabasa nyo sa iba. Get outsiders' perspective. And if they approve, more likely you will have come up with a fairly solid set of conclusions. And then next question, have I drawn strong conclusions? If not, have I expressed the weaknesses of them and why? So for example, kung you did 10 experiments and you only had 6 results that are consistent with theory and with what others have done, you should acknowledge it that, okay, possibly inconclusive, or out of the 3 research questions, we can only offer, a fairly robust answer to one of them. The rest, we don't have enough evidence, though we have like some impression of what it could be, but you have to acknowledge what's the weakness of your study and what you weren't able to prove. And if you do that, if you're very clear when it comes to that, that shows maturity as well and integrity. And because they are transparent, they acknowledge that the data that they gathered after 1 year of doing it in this college thesis, they don't have enough to prove their point. So that is always a very good touch, or a very good aspect to demonstrate, like when you're writing up your conclusion. So dito, ito yung example natin. So doon sa gold nanoparticle study natin, ano ba yung mga research questions or objectives that we have mentioned in our introduction? So development of cheap and effective anti-cancer drugs can significantly decrease cancer deaths. So in-address dun sa conclusion that the synthesis of cheap and size-uniform gold nanoparticles was achieved via light-mediated colloidal technique. So na-address mo yun, that you were able to achieve or to develop a method that is cheap enough to make improvements. Next, based on reported anti-cancer property of size-uniform silver nanoparticles, this study explored if gold nanoparticles have promising anti-cancer properties. And you will have also demonstrated that in vivo studies in mice, when you use 5 to 10 nanometers gold nanoparticles, you were able to demonstrate that your material performed 50% better than the best in class. So, or the next best alternative. So again, the objectives that you have expressed like in the beginning should be answered by your conclusion. Next example. So this study explored if recent techniques in nanoparticle synthesis can be adapted to develop a cheaper process for producing size-controlled nanoparticles. So, you can also mention that. You came up with an atom economic model forming the exact same 5 to 10 nanometer size particles at a cost that is 40% lower than the incumbent commercial processes. So again, you were able to make comparison. So where did you get the 40% cheaper price? So that is actually by benchmarking with a reported study out there. If they provided a detailed enough run through of the materials they use, the conditions, you'll be able to compare yung cost. So this is actually how you set up how you structure your conclusion. It should be answering the research questions that you expressed in the beginning. It should be validating yung inyong hypothesis that you use as the basis of the study. All right. And then last section, so di ba sinabi ko kanina, optional. You can actually recommend research extension or like future studies. No? So dito, sinabi that the formation of products led to loss of 5% of the starting material and some variability in the size and shape of gold nanoparticles. So what you're recommending here is for future students to optimize the synthesis conditions to further increase the yield. Kasi sayang naman yung 5%. 5% of a gold-based material would be very expensive kasi alam niyo naman yung price ng gold. So yun, so that's like a potential improvement in the study that you are performing, and you're recommending that they do it. So that's also, so yung contribution sa science, hindi lang siya yung data. You might also contribute by, recommending ideas on what people can do. So that's how you can pay it forward to the community as well. And then last, and gusto ko rin talagang ipakita to sa inyo that the references section is a non-negotiable. You should have it in your thesis or in your scientific report. Always reference your sources of information. So whether it be books, articles, databases, and even interviews from people. So dapat you should be citing, you should be giving credit to where or to whom credit is due. And then when it comes to journal articles and other published materials, you should also follow the prescribed format and guidelines provided either by your respective institutions or by yung publication houses, like through kung saan nyo ipapublish yung inyong journal. So again, make it a practice. So whatever source of information that you use, you are acknowledging them, you are citing them in the references section. All right. So essentially that caps the writing part of this. So actually halos saktong-sakto tayo sa oras. So it's 1 p.m. your time. So if you have questions though when it comes to research writing, I'd be happy to answer questions that you may have. Okay, so may question si Sir Marlo Fabia. So how to better state conclusion if the data gathered and analysis is just a result from a regression analysis? Actually, sir, medyo could you provide a bit more context to that? So ano pong ibig sabihin nyo dun sa if it's just a result of a regression analysis? Perhaps you can speak up din po. You can unmute yourself. And then question naman from Sir Ernest John Gabonada. What are your thoughts on using AI tools to help write research reports? Because we are now in Industry 4.0 where most of the people use AI tools to assist them in their work. So there are some people who are leveraging AI and drafting a research report. By all means, like we are not discouraging you from doing that. But then yung issue po kasi then sa AI, gaya na sinabi ko rin kahapon, is that what you would get from it, most especially yung contextualization ng results nyo in comparison to other studies, is that AI, at this point, it'll just like, it'll pull up information from anywhere. So meaning, it might also pull in, or it may incorporate information that are wrong. So yun din yung risk. So use it at your own risk, and then also at the same time, yun po kasing information that they would put in there sometimes hindi din traceable, hindi nyo rin alam kung saan niya hinugot. So there are also like some intellectual property aspects when it comes to that. So what other people are doing is that they're using AI to come up with an initial draft, but then they take everything with a grain of salt. So meaning there are certain statements that they have to be verified as well. Kailangan yung alamin, saan ba nakuha to? And if that came from a source of information that the AI tool did not cite, then it is your responsibility to cite the source of information. Kasi pag hindi nyo po yung ginawa, you might not know it, but AI might have been using other people's information that should have been cited. Medyo meron pong ethical aspect doon. And then, again, babalik po ako doon sa aspeto na yung AI ngayon, garbage in, garbage out. So kung ano man yung database na pinagkuhanan niya ng information, baka may mali. So use it at your own risk. Ayan. May follow-up comment si Sir Marlo Fabia. is using extrapolation to be used in case we just do accelerated studies or part of the regression analysis. So siguro po, when you're drawing up conclusions, Sir Marlo, make sure that you acknowledge that okay, these are the data that we got, and itong conclusions na ginagawa namin is essentially just like an extrapolation of the limited set of data that we gathered. So for as long as you provide that context po, that essentially also like communicates na ay mature yung way ng pagko-conclude niyo, that you're acknowledging that yung basis ng conclusion is just like a limited set of data. So if you do it that way, readers will respect you. All right. Any more questions po when it comes to research writing? Wala na? Wala na po ba kayong questions? All right. So what I will be doing is that I will be sharing with you yung attendance form po for this session. So JP actually just had to step out kasi nahatid niya yung asawa niya. Please make sure po that when you enter your information dun sa ating attendance form, that you please check yung spelling ng inyong names kasi we auto-generate the certificate. So essentially, what information you put in is what you're gonna get back. And we're also gonna request that you be patient kasi po we generate like those certificates in batches. So sometimes it could take about a week for you to get the certificate. So we also ask that you wait siguro po up until siguro a week before po kayo mag-follow up kasi po minsan hindi rin po namin din masyado mapipredict with accuracy kung kailan nyo mismo makukuha yung certificate ninyo. Alright, mukhang hindi yata check ko lang po yung link mukhang hindi gumagana nung sinend ko dito. I will also be sharing the same link po sa ating YouTube channel. Alright, so mukhang gumagana na po yung link na yan. Any more questions po while we're still in the session? Alright. So if not, again, maraming salamat po sa pagsama ninyo sa amin ngayong linggong ito. We hope that meron po kayong nakuhang nuggets of information here and there. This is more of a crash course. So what we told you was that focus namin was on the skills and the practical aspects of this. But then if you really want to learn more about the specifics and the technicalities of the different research steps involved in any research project that you might tackle in your graduate or undergraduate career, meron po kaming portfolio of training courses po sa aming website at saka sa aming YouTube channel. Doon po talaga hinimay-himay po namin itong mga ito. But then again, we hope that you appreciate kung ano ba talaga yung higher purpose of performing research, most especially when it comes to skills development. So we hope po na kung i-share niyo po sa mga kasamahan niyo yung mga natutunan niyo ngayong araw na ito. And we hope din po na balik-balik lang po kayo kasi every once in a while po we offer training courses like this. Marami po kaming programs na nakaplano when it comes to research training para sa mga estudyante at mga guro na mga Pilipino at sa mga kasamahan natin sa Southeast Asia. So watch out for announcements po in 2024. Tuloy-tuloy lang po itong mga programs natin. So ayan. And so with that, we would like to thank you all again for joining us ngayong araw po ito. And we're happy to be able to be of service sa ating mga college students. So, and I'm hoping again, yung sinabi namin kahapon, that this sharing also inspires you to pursue careers in research and development. So gusto namin nila JP na marami pa po ding maging kaparehas namin na maging scientists and innovators in the future. All right? And so with that, we'd like to thank you all for joining us today. And ingat po kayo, and we hope that you enjoy the rest of your weekend. We hope you enjoy the holidays. And then we'll see you again in upcoming sessions of our programs of Filipino Science Hub. Alright. Thank you, everyone. Ingat po kayo. Bye. Thank you. Ingat po. Ay, Merry Christmas po. Malapit na pa. Magbabakasyon ako sa Pilipinas in a couple of weeks. So, ingat po kayo palagi. Thank you so much. I'm gonna be ending the Zoom session. Enjoy the rest